fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and the D's have now racked up their 3 worst losses since 2021 as they were handed their 4th loss in 5 games, and the possibility of playing finals is starting to slip away. Joining me tonight to dissect another woeful performance on the big stage is longtime Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to Ben Man. Good evening to our very, very, very loyal listeners for turning up again. Both Ben Man and I watched this game together, so we'd be wondering, Andy, if our performance looked any better from your seats.
Well, if you were in the MCC, I was on the other side of the direct opposite side of the ground, and it most definitely probably didn't change the perspective of the performance, even though I'm probably more on the negative side than you guys, but we'll see where the chips fall tonight. Also joining us tonight, let us know what stage of grief he's currently in is B-Man. Good evening, B-Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. And I said a couple of weeks ago, the ladder doesn't lie. And it still doesn't lie, Andy. We're 4 points out of 4th. So, I mean, that's just the reality of the numbers, and that's where we're at. As George said, we sat together, and it was quite a thing up in the MCC. It's been a long time since I've been in the MCC. And it was quite fun, actually, because half the crowd were yelling, kick it, when we handballed, and then we kicked it straight to a Pies player, and then they were yelling, handball it. And then we handball it to a D's player immediately under pressure and then kick it. So it was like one of those, it was a flashback to a previous time. So, but not too bad, actually, not in terms of, certainly not as devastated as I was last week. And we'll get into it a bit with the stats. I watched Goody's presser. I mean, he's not the most natural of performers at the best of time, Goody, but I can see sort of the struggle he was having with, some of the positives that, he was at pains to say, I know the D's fans aren't feeling, that positive or I know that they hate losing, but there were some real positives. And I think, looking at the numbers, I think there were some real positives, which we'll get to a bit later. But, really disappointing. I'm getting thoroughly sick of being beaten by the Pies, that's for sure.
What is it, 4 out of the last 5 we've lost to them? Yes, I'm getting sick of that too.
And how many of them in exactly the same refrain, if we could kick straight? I mean, it felt like one of those days where, hitting the post. There was a shot where George and I were sitting. We had a good angle on the goals towards the punt road end, and there was a shot, I think it was it Fritsch or maybe it was one of 𝗍ici's, where it looked all the way, I think it was a 𝗍ici's goal. All the way it looked like a goal. And then at the last second drifted and hit the right goal post. It just was one of those days from a kicking perspective.
There was 1 or 2 of theirs as well that all the way didn't look like a goal.
One of Kruger's, we could see that beautifully, is the same thing.
I thought it was Kruger wasn't even going to not go through for a goal. I thought, let alone hit the post, and what came all the way back. And Kruger,
didn't he for one of his goals handball it off and then they just gave it back to him?
I'm going to put Kruger in the file of one of those players who always kicks it back against the D's.
I think 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗁, who used to sometimes co-host, had a word. There was the Kent Kingsley Award of one of those players that you'd never heard of, who always seemed to just bob up and kick their bag against Melbourne.
Yeah. Or Tim Membry.
Tim Membry,
yeah. Well, Tim Membry used to do it to us all the time. I'm talking about the one-offs that you never hear from ever again. All right, well, let's move on because we do have a lot to talk about tonight. We'll get into our reviews because each week I put the call out to our loyal listeners to help us out by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts. We love the feedback, and we do reward our loyal listeners who do take the time to provide those 5-star reviews by giving them a shout-out on the show. And Magnus writes, Great podcast. This is a fantastic podcast to learn about AFL and the Melbourne Football Club. Even after playing for many years, I still learn new things each week about our amazing game. Keep up the great work, Magnus. So thanks for that feedback, Magnus, and glad we can help with your footy education. And hopefully tonight we can help the club on how they can fix all of their problems, because we are the experts. And keep that feedback coming, and we will give you a shout out on the show. If you follow us on any of the social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you want to leave us a feedback, post a comment or a question for the show, you can post under our podcast post each week, or just slide into our DMs. We've got one tonight from Facebook. We won't read out your full name on the show to keep you anonymous. In addition to being available on Apple, Google, Spotify, SoundCloud, or whatever podcasting app you prefer, the Demonland podcast is available on YouTube. Just search for Demonland Podcast to find our channel. If you want to chat with other Demon fans from across Australia and around the world, head on over to demonland.com. You can sign up. It's completely free. And in addition to be able to post some questions for this show, as most of our questions come from Demonland, you can also chat with other Demons fans about all things Demons related. So join up and join in on the conversation. And if you'd like to join us on the air tonight to talk about any of the topics that we are going to talk about, give us a call on 039016 3666. That's 039016 3666. As always, I will answer. I'll put you on mute and bring you on when there's a break in the conversation. During the week, give that number a call and leave a voicemail. We've got a plethora of them tonight. The phones were ringing hot, guys, as soon as the siren sounded. So we've got about 5 or 6 voicemails to litter throughout the show. If you are listening live, you want to join us in the chat room, head on over to demonland.com/podcast. And we're live every Monday night, so come join us and listen to the show live rather than on the podcast. Head on over, demonland.com, Monday nights, 8:30 p.m. Let's get into the match overview. The Melbourne Demons faced another significant setback as they headed into the bye, suffering a comprehensive defeat to an undermanned and inexperienced Collingwood side in the traditional King's Birthday blockbuster. The Demons fell by 38 points at the G in front of 84,659 fans. Crowd was very vocal, with Collingwood fans booing Stephen May in response to his comments at last year's BNF, whilst the D's fans' boos of Brader Maynard for his decking of Angus Brayshaw in last year's finals were drowned out by the Pies fans' cheers. The D's performance was marked by hesitancy and poor execution, and despite having a personnel advantage, essentially were only missing Jake Lever, the Demons could not capitalise on their opportunities. The D's confidence appeared fragile, and their forward half inefficiency was glaring, resulting in a season-low 6 goals. Melbourne star player Christian Petrarca was kneed in the ribs by Collingwood captain Darcy Moore late in the first quarter, significantly hampering his performance. He was replaced by Jack Billings at the start of the second half. The Demons struggled with poor conversion in front of goal, hitting the post twice and missing several gettable shots, including a potential goal by Kozzie Pickett that was overturned by the Arc. And the standout for the D's was Jacob Van Rooyen, who kicked 3 goals, showcasing his talent with a series of contested marks and strong finishes. Alex Neal-Bullen delivered a tagging masterclass, restricting Collingwood star Nick Dacos to a season-low 15 touches before Dacos was subbed out with a leg injury in the fourth quarter. Melbourne's tactical approach seemed confused, oscillating between their traditional contested game style and a new strategy developed over the summer. This inconsistency has contributed to their poor form, with the team losing 4 of its past 5 games. And the Demons' defensive operations looked disconnected. Their midfield, a once formidable, struggled to compete against Collingwood's second-string lineup, which was missing Jordan De Goey, Tom Mitchell and Scott Pendlebury. Melbourne's season is at a critical juncture. Simon Goodwin and his coaching staff face significant challenges in addressing the team's tactical and psychological issues. We'll talk more about that later. With the finals no longer a certainty, the Demons must find a way to regain their form and confidence if they hope to compete in September. And the D's must now use the bye week to regroup and reassess their game plan as the top 8 and finals are slowly slipping from their grasp. George, we haven't heard much from you. Any general comments?
I think we'll cover off most of it in the duration of this podcast, but I'll talk about inaccuracy later on. But
Yeah.
The opportunities that went begging that would have completely changed the outcome of this game in front of goal were just damning. And sadly, it's the same thing that we've been talking about, the inability to kick particularly from set shots has been a bogey for us for the last 2 years at least. Why? I don't know. Simply beyond me. Even in this game, people like Fritsch were unable to kick accurately. Normally, you'd expect Fritsch would have kicked 3 goals in this game. Thank goodness for JVR, who has absolutely impeccable style and approach to the way he kicks goals. If we could get him to teach everybody else, get the 20-year-old to teach all the other players in the side how to aim for the big sticks, the result would have been very different. But it was very, very, very frustrating game. There's a lot of other aspects beyond that, but that was the real standout.
It was another massively frustrating game from that front. I mean, I was pulling my hair out with some of the kicking. It's. I guess a body of work is built up. There's enough data to look at big games. I know there's a question about this, so we'll get into it in more detail. But to pose the question about our ability to handle pressure, that miss by Turner just reeked of a player who was afraid of missing that goal. Like, it was, he didn't look confident at all walking in to kick the ball. Massively frustrating. The kicking was terrible right through the game. And although it's curious is that actually the numbers weren't, a mile that far apart, but it felt like watching it. It was just so frustrating in that first quarter, wasn't it, George, to not score. We just needed to get going. And I thought we had the better of that first quarter. The numbers were all sort of trending our way. And to top it off, celebrating 𝗍ici's goal. And, what is it with goal reviews? It seemed cursed with that technology. And, I was about to say I couldn't believe it when 𝗍ici's goal was overturned, but I could. And I wonder whether that vibe sort of infected the side to a degree, where it's like, what could go wrong did go wrong. And what's that saying for tinny, isn't it? Like when someone's regarded as super lucky, that was, the Pies, even one of the goals that Kruger kicked, I think it was a Kruger, maybe it was where it was a toe tap accidentally. There were 2 toe taps, one that we kicked that was marked, the one that 𝗍ici's kicked, that long bomb, and another one where one of their forwards accidentally kicked it out of the air to Kruger, who turned and kicked it. So it just felt like we were fated to lose that game, and the players seemed to be playing like it. I don't know, but
it's really, really deflating for any team in any sport when you put it, particularly more so in AFL football, where the whole team has to put in so much effort just to get the ball to the other end of the ground to have the opportunity, and then get nothing out of it, and then get nothing out of it the next time and the next time, not a single goal in the first quarter, when it could have easily been the other way around, and we would have done, exactly what Collingwood did to us. But once again, it was started with Turner. It didn't get any better from there.
Yeah, and you wonder whether, again, we go into a game, we were the ones under pressure. They could play free. They had the sort of get out of jail card a little bit in terms of their injuries. Credit to Macrae. I think Macrae has done a great job with that team in terms of their psychology, and he would have played on that. They're the team under pressure. He talked about the fact in his press conference about, we want to be clear that they'll come out hard, and we need to be ready for it. And I guess that's pretty obvious, but yeah, it was just one of those games. And I mean, just quickly, Andy, for me, in terms of framing, where we're at, let it sit for a little while, but 𝗍ici𝗋𝗋𝘀𝗁, as you probably know, it's probably no, surprise. And that's partly, it was only partly facetious saying we're only 4 points from the top 8. From the top 4, and we're on the same number of points. We're 10th, aren't we? And 28, isn't it? 28 points is 8th. So we're on the same number of points as in the 8. Leaving aside that, the 4 or 5, as you said, is that, I am firmly of the belief that the football changing in terms of preparation. I've talked about that all season, and there's recent history to look at in terms of teams just last year, on the back of last year, at exactly this corresponding stage of the season. After 13 rounds, let's have a look. The Blues were 4-8. They'd won 4, lost 8, and drawn 1. And the Giants, in 15th position, the Giants were 5-8 as well. They'd won 5 and lost 8 at the corresponding stage of the season. And we know they both came home in a rush. You know, arguably the Giants were unlucky not to make the flag. They easily could have rolled the Pies in the prelim. So, that's been the recent history. Swans are too, I think, at the similar stage. So Swans last year at the same exact corresponding stage. We'll have a look. So Swans were in 13th, 5 wins, 7 losses. Giants were in 14th, 5 wins, 8 losses. And the Blues were 4 wins, 8. Now, I mean, that's 3 teams who ended up closer to the pointy end of the season. That's a fairly interesting sort of compelling data point, isn't it, in terms of what 𝗟𝗏 has said, that you want to be playing your best footy, and I think being in your optimal shape come December. Come December. That's a bit late in the day. Come September, and a bit what 𝗟𝗏 was saying in that clip we played a few weeks ago is that he's of the belief is that it's August is the time then when you want to be playing your best footy. So I'm hanging my hat in terms of looking forward for that. It's still a very long way to go. And obviously, we've got the bye now and we desperately look like we need it. And, let's hope we don't get beaten by the Roos, because then every wheel that's on the bus is coming off.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, before B-Man does his deep dive into the stats, we have a couple of questions regarding the stats that hopefully B-Man has some answers for. So Demon WA writes, keen to hear the analysis of the stats. Thought we went with more of a typical front half style of game, but got burnt out the back a bit. Just don't have the depth to cover Lever and Track being injured. Thank God for the bye. And Radish D writes, building on my suspicion that the Ds aren't able to effectively move the ball to the forward line, I ran some stats on intercepts allowed, points from turnover, and points from turnover allowed, and it makes for some interesting reading. Melbourne currently ranks 16th in the league for turnover points per intercept, 0.6, and 14th in turnover points allowed per intercept, 0.73. Similarly, if we look at scoring shots from turnover per intercept, Melbourne score from 17.8%, 16th rank of intercepts, while allowing scores from 18.4%, 11th of intercepts. Interestingly, the defensive side has gone down from 16.4%, 3rd, since the Carlton game, the last full game before Lever was injured. So my reading on the situation, without Lever, we are stuffed at the moment. We haven't been able to consistently move the ball downfield from intercepts all season, but without Lever, the defence is completely stuffed. The intercept numbers are about the same, 68 without and 69 with, but it's the non-intercept points of our game that are suffering. Lever was patching over the holes, but their game plan isn't working yet. The top 8 teams are more consistent than Melbourne at scoring from their intercepts. They regularly score on more than 20% of their intercepts, with very few games between 10% and 15%. Melbourne has 4 games of 13 in this range. Sydney, Carlton, Port and Geelong all have 1. Surprisingly, we actually seem to be improving slightly in this respect, but with our last 5 intercept scoring percents being 13, 15, 22.5, 16.5 and 21.5%. Getting Lever back after the bye should help the defensive part of our game, but it's the ball movement that really needs to improve if we want to compete this year. For what it's worth, this data kind of says we should have won today, but scoring 4-10 from turnover and allowing 10 goals 1 from turnover is absolutely where the game was lost. Is this a fitness issue? We're too tired when taking shots to kick accurately. JVR accepted. So, big man, take it away with your stats files, and if you wanted to talk to any of those points, feel free.
Yeah, I might speak to that second question first, if I can. But it's interesting is that there was a comment on it by Melbourne by Demonland poster a couple of weeks ago, Triple J JJJ with his avatars, I think Darren Bennett winding up for one of those big bombs. And he'd said that he was at a function, and a Melbourne function presumably, where there was a discussion about playing a different method and a more turnover game, more transition-based game. He said that we definitely are, but the goodie is still wedded to a defensive, defense-first football, which sort of, it doesn't surprise me at all, because as I've made the point a number of times, is I think we'll revert to that model as we sort of approach the finals. I think that's assuming we're in the finals. Well, we'll be approaching some finals. I think we'll revert to that style with defense first. But the reason I raise that is that other teams who, are more pure turnover teams, and say Swans is a good example, and Pies when they're up and about are a good example too. And you could see some of that yesterday, is that they take much greater risks with their defense and push up higher, where we're still sort of trying to have our cake and eat it too a little bit, which I think impacts our ability to go all the way with turnover. So the more extreme example is Port. Port basically give, if there was the polar opposite from a team in the AFL in terms of that defense first philosophy, it'd be Port, because they push up so hard and they're forward half as well, but they transition fast. If you get it past them, that's why they get so many scores, big scores put on them, because if you get through their back line, through that back line as it's pushing up, they're always at risk of giving up goals. But that same balance means that they're really good at transitioning the ball. Sydney have got a sort of probably a stronger defensive system, but that's aided by playing so many of their games at the SCG, where they clag up that back line so well. But on the bigger open space is, their fitness there. I think they're really super fit at the moment, and there'll be some discussion here tonight about the Melbourne's fitness, which I don't think we are, whether hopefully that's by design, and we'll see. But so to that question, I think that Goody's sort of still wanting to maintain the defensive shape and the defensive system does two things playing that transition model. It makes it more difficult to score on turnover, because you're not fully committing to that high turnover game. And it also puts the defence under a lot of pressure, because, as I said last week, remember 𝗍𝗍 was talking about in that Richmond game when there was so many turnovers by both sides, how hard it was on the defenders having to get back all the time once the ball was turned over. But the other point, of course, is our poor kicking skills. Like yesterday was a perfect example. Again, this is a bit of a surprise when I looked at the numbers. They weren't actually that bad in terms of comparative numbers between us and Collingwood. So maybe I'm over-egging the pudding a bit and how well Collingwood kicked the ball. But it seemed to me at the game, they were carving us up on transition. Partly, I think, because we're cooked and we weren't spreading as well as we could, as we should have. And so they were free targets. But also, I think, that defensive system on transition, but that turnover game does require players hitting high-risk kicks. And who was hitting them yesterday? No one was hitting them. I don't think Windsor has been as good a kick as I hoped he was. Billings was brought in as partly for his kicking. He never got amongst it. Clary was about, he hit a really nice target inside in the corridor one and inside 50. But there weren't too many other, McVie, I think that opposition teams are putting into McVie, or maybe he's also getting putting time into McVie. So he's not getting the bounce we'd hope from that sort of halfback transition play. And then the other one is, Howes has been quiet, so he's not been hitting targets. 𝗟𝗍 probably a bit better, but I think they're putting time into Salo as well. So, I think those factors really make it, the combination of still being very defence first and having that mindset impacts our ability to turn it over and our kicking skills generally. But also there's another factor I think that's important, and we'll talk about it in different ways tonight, but is that they're trying to learn a new model. And I really agree with the comment you made, Andy, that they look confused at different times with what model they were playing. And I know I was joking about the handballing, but it was a bit ridiculous at some stage. Clary handballed to 𝗍𝗏, I think, when he was right next to him. He got smashed straight away in a tackle, and it just seemed to happen all day. And, under our pure plan, so this sort of goes to that first question, is I agree, and I called it last week, that I thought we would play a more traditional forward half game, and that's exactly what we did in that first quarter. But as the game wore on, they seemed to get caught out a little bit between the two styles, and one of which is in 21, 22, 23, when in doubt, what do? You kick as long as you can, as far down the ground as you can. That was really one of the hallmarks of the model. But in this game, we too often, it seemed to me, try to handball. Maybe that was because we hadn't covered up the ground. It was hard to tell at times, but it seemed to me that when they were playing that pure model, they just belt the ball down the ground. Did you feel the same thing watching, George?
Yeah, I think the classic example was when Stephen May handballed it to Kruger, was it, or 𝗦cie in the goal square? Stephen May would have kicked the ball.
Yeah,
absolutely every time, and all of a sudden he's trying to handball. It was just ridiculous what he was trying to do. So, yeah, I think the instruction would be to try and get the handball going, but yeah, it doesn't do you any favours, as it didn't in this game.
And that handball, those little chains of handball, which, fair play to Collingwood, they do really well. So, I mean, it's interesting because Collingwood, looked very structured, and that's how we've always looked. So, it's no small thing changing a model and then trying to go back to it. But those little sort of short hand passes are what set up transition footy, so often. It's not, it's easy to think about that high risk kick that goes into the corridor, but often it's the handball that gets it out from the contest and out, and those quick handballs that allow the transition. And we've been trying them all season, right from that, that practice game against the Blues, where it seemed like and even Richmond, where we're handball happy. It seems like we've been trying to do that all season. And this was the game to not do it in some respects, is just get it 60 metres down the ground and hope you win it up the ground. And even if you don't, you've got time to set up behind the ball. And so they seem to get caught between two stools there for a little while. So, but just on that, I think that was my, I thought that that's how we would play last week, a much more sort of traditional back to the future style game. And so the numbers looked a little bit like that, particularly in the first quarter. So time in forward half was a huge indicator for us in the last 3 years before this year. The big indicators were time in forward half, metres gained, and inside 50s in terms of our model winning, apart from stoppages and clearances and contested footy. But those three, time in forward half, metres gained, and inside 50. And in this match, the time in forward half for the first quarter was 68 to us, 32 to them, and that was classic Melbourne football, and we just didn't take advantage of it, which was also classic Melbourne football. It felt like Groundhog Day, those misses. But really interestingly, that was the only quarter where we really dominated at that time in forward half. I think they're playing a really interesting mix. They hurt us in that first quarter on transition. It was really, in some respects, quite a similar first quarter to the final we played against them. 68-32 in the first quarter. They evened it up, and I thought they were pretty impressive in that second quarter, 44-56, and they did a good job of trapping it in. Third quarter was 49-51. Last quarter was 57-43, so we got sort of going a bit better in terms of that forward half footy. For the match, it was 54-46. So if you think back to 21, 22, 23, often we were up around the 60-40 split or 58-59. So that's better. But in terms of it looking like that older style, if that's where we want to go. But I did note on Demonland, there's a certain irony of, 90% of Demonland wanted us to get rid of this game plan for the last 3 years, and certainly in the last couple of years. And we have, and now people are pining for it to come back. So it's a bit careful what you wish for to an extent. Metres gained we were down 203, which I think speaks to that second and third quarter where the Pies really came out and I thought played super well. So that they had a tick over 6,000 metres. We had just under 5,900 metres gain. Inside 50s was 47.50, and that I can't recall, but I think I saw a stat in the first quarter where we're well up at 5 or 6 up. But so we would have preferred that to have won that, maybe 55-45, something like that. So 47.50, they wouldn't have been super pleased. So going through the numbers of the red and blueprint, so I think just keeping in mind that we were playing a sort of hybrid style with that forward half emphasis. But as I said, I think they got caught between two stools. I found this really curious doing the stats today and looking at them, and feel some sympathy to what Goody was saying in the presser about, being positive and like I said before, but because looking at the numbers, I can see where he's coming from. Opposition score, so, in whatever model Melbourne playing under Goody, the two core elements of defence and contest. Opposition score, 89 is higher than we would like for sure, but let's face it, they were tinny, as I said, and they couldn't miss. And they're just to sort of highlight that their expected score was 71.2. Intercepts are an important part of defence, and this was a real positive. So speaking of intercepts, even without Lever, so that point about Lever is a good one, I think, in terms of how much we miss him. Defensively, we really, I don't know what you think, George, but we really missed that player coming across that third man in contest. I think that was a huge sort of gap for us. But intercepts was 65.57, so we're +8 for intercepts. We're +8 for intercept marks as well, 26.18. They're good numbers, even with the model in 21 to 23. They're the sorts of numbers we're looking for against a team as good as, or a team around our mark in Collingwood. Marks inside 50, we had one more mark than them inside 50, so +1, 13 to 12. 12 is probably too many marks that we wouldn't have liked to have given 12 up. Part of that was their fast transition, but I wonder whether there's that Lever effect. There are a couple of marks which I felt like Lever would have come across and swatted it away. Contests, so sort of last week we talked about how terrible our contest was. We were down 42 contested possessions last week. In this match, we were +23, 128 to 105. We only managed 96 last week. We had 128 this week to 105. +23 is, that would have been almost the key metric they would have looked for coming into this match. And so Goody would have been thrilled with +23. I thought that was super impressive. And just on that, post clearance is a really important stat, particularly this style of forward half footy. It's even more important in post clearance. Hardball gets, we were +8, 12 to 4 for hardball gets post clearance. We were +12 for loose ball gets, 45 to 33 post clearance, and +4 for contested marks post clearance. They're really good numbers, particularly the hardball gets, +8 against a team that that's one of their strengths, is winning that post clearance possession. The Pies, that is. So contested possessions, +23, they'd definitely be happy with. Ground ball gets was a really, interesting one. I've been saying that there seems to be a correlation with playing a turnover transition game with losing ground ball. We're being smashed in ground ball, which was a one wood for us for between 21 and 23. We're number one for ground ball gets all 3 years, or if not one, we were two. But it's really fallen away this year, I think partly because of playing that different model. Coming back to a more a traditional Goodwin model, we smashed them for ground balls, 89 to 70. We were +19 for ground ball gets, which is be close to our best performance all year for that number. Contested marks is another important element of the contest. We were +4 for contested marks. And George mentioned JVR. I thought he was awesome. I thought he was a standout. And I keep saying it. He's the most underrated young player in the AFL. The kid's a gun. The kid's an absolute jet. 14 to 10. Marks inside 50, as I mentioned before, 13, 12. Clearances is another sort of part of the contest. We were down 8 for centre clearances and down 2 for stoppage clearances, and I'll talk to the scoring. I just don't think that is where it was bad in our model, as Goody said, is that it gave them territory. That they barely scored from their centre clearances, so it wasn't really much of an issue from that perspective. But Goody's right in terms of it giving them automatic territory, and that probably speaks to a little bit why they were able to sort of engineer a better time in forward half in the second and third quarter, in particular, the Pies, that is. So the big one, though, that I thought was some really positive numbers there. but then some not so positive numbers around the contests. And this was shocking, really. Like our pressure numbers were terrible. So a reminder, pressure points are the weight sum of pressure acts. Physical pressure acts like tackling anytime they touch another player is 3.75, closing acts 2.25, chasing acts 1.5, and corralling 1.2. First quarter 179 to 172, we were +7, so not too bad, but keeping in mind 180 were only okay in the differential. 180 is the considered average, 200 is considered elite. Second quarter 167 to 187, down 20 in that second quarter. Third quarter, come out after a break, fired up 198 to 205, better in terms of the pressure, but still down 7, and they did a lot of damage in that third quarter. And then the last quarter was just appalling, 154 to 160. So that's a complete, what am I doing? That's last week. So 175, sorry, apologise. This week was 163 we opened with, down 10. So start again, 163 to 173, which is just woeful. But the second quarter was horrible, 146 to 199, down 53 in a quarter. I'd be guessing that's probably one of the highest ever. So after, our pressure was not great last week, but it was just appalling again this week. It was just so bad. And so for the match, it was 164 to 187, down 23. In that last quarter, when the game, we needed to do something, it was 167 to 201. The Pies were able to ramp their pressure up in the last quarter to 201. We were down 34. So we had one quarter, only one quarter we're up. We were up in quarter 3, 179 to 173. But geez, 146 to 199 in the second and 167 to 201 in the fourth. I think it speaks to where we were cooked. And, I'm starting to think pressure is probably the best indicator of fitness. Last week, I'll get this right. So last week, our top 5 pressure players were Clayton Oliver, 𝗍cie, Neal-Bullen, 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗁, Track. This week it was the most curious mix all season. So 𝗍cie again was right up there. He was number 1, but well below his season average of pressure points. His season average is 61, and he only managed 43 in this game. Caleb Windsor had his best pressure game for the season, 42 points, so credit to him. He was second. 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝘁 just on almost his average, 39 to his average 42. 𝗟𝗏 had his best pressure game for a while, 38 to 27. And then Laurie Bailey, he was not too bad actually. Bailey Laurie. And he was 38 and his season average is 14. But, that's an unusual mix of players in our top 5. Our bottom 6 players last week I've mentioned a lot of them were defenders: Rivers, McDonald, Salem, McVie, May, Hunter. This week our top bottom 6 pressure players were Billings. Tom McDonald, who only had 12 pressure points, averages 21, but it's hard to knock him. I thought he was our best defender. Blake Howes was, only 11 points. Stephen May had a shocker, 10 pressure points, although I'm just looking now, he's only averages 10 per match. Jake Bowie, almost half his season average of pressure, 15.5 he averages pressure points per game, and he only managed 9. And Disco Turner, the lights weren't on for Disco. He only managed 4 pressure acts for 7 pressure points. He averages 13. That, it was a horrible game from Disco, I have to say. The other big curious number, given, it's quite strange, that sort of combination of our contest was good and our pressure was so low, was our tackles. We were down 20 for tackles, so 49 to 69. Tackles inside 50 were 9 to 15. They're bad numbers, whatever way you look at it. It feels to me that, we're cooked. And really, really needing the bye. I think Melbourne fans are probably really needing the bye as well. Transition from back half, these were curious numbers as well. So it was actually pretty good numbers. So we averaged points from our defensive half, which is one of the key indicators, I think, of that transition game, that turnover game. We were averaging 31.2 this season per game. We managed 31 in this game. Where average teams against us, playing against us, are averaging 28.8. we kept the Pies to only 25 points from their defensive half in this game. So both of them are big ticks. Scores from turnover, I mentioned before, are really critical in terms of an indicator about the transition game working. The scores from turnover, and this was, I forget the name of the who did the second question, Andy, ahead of this, but from turnover, we scored 4 goals 10, 34 points from turnover. So we had 14 scoring shots from turnover, which is pretty good. They had 11 scoring shots from turnover. They scored 10 goals, 61 points from turnover. I mean, that must be I would be shocked if there's not a more accurate score from turnover this season. That's just a crazy, crazy number. 10-1-61. So we were actually down, we had 3 more scores from turnover, which is a fantastic result on its face. But the points differential was -27. Now, I mentioned before, totally agree with the thought that one of the big issues with losing the centre bounce numbers is that territory. But the reality is we didn't score anything from centre bounce, so that's not great. But they only scored 7 points, 1 goal, 1. So we're only down 7 points from that. And it's not really about the number of clearances. It's about the impact from those clearances. And we were down, again, this is really about the accuracy. We had 7 scoring shots from stoppages. They had 6, 2-5-17 to 3-3-21. So we were down 4. So all up, we were down 11 from our stoppages. So hardly disastrous, in particularly the centre bounce. And just on that, so from scores from stoppages, we scored 17. Our season average is 21.8. Teams are averaging 20 points from stoppages against us this year. The Pies only managed 21, so they would look at that, and that's not too bad. But of course, where we lost the game is, as this is where footy's at the moment, is on turnover, down 27. As I said, 4-10, 34 to 10-1-61, which is just crazy. Just finally, the fitness. So it's an ongoing conversation, and there's a sort of discussion about it coming up, but the pressure numbers were terrible. I think I have to check, but I've got a feeling that might be our worst this season. If not, I don't want to see what's worse. I mentioned how they arrive at the pressure points. So the big one is 3.75 for physical acts. I say it's worth noting that because we were plus 23 for contested ball, which suggests we were okay in the contest. So we would have got, enough of those 3.75 points, although 20 less tackles cuts against that. But I'll bet if I could get a breakdown of the numbers, we would have been hopeless for chasing and closing acts. And I think that lack of pressure was a huge reason the Pies were able to have free players to hit up on transition so often. So, maybe I'm overplaying how well the Pies kick, but it just seemed to me we weren't spreading and covering their outlets, and they were hitting them. I really think that we're cooked physically. This is not making excuses at all. I think we're desperate for the bye, probably psychologically as much as anything. But physically, we look absolutely cooked. And there's some comments about this on Demonland, and I can't remember, sorry, Andy, if this is going to be discussed, but I thought we looked flat coming out. There were a number of people around. A friend of George's mentioned the same thing, and there's a number of comments on Demonland saying they had looked like they had more pep in their step as they came onto the ground, the Pies that is, and we looked flat from the get-go. So, I think if we're cooked, that would result in a drop-off of those sorts of numbers that I spoke about before in terms of pressure. But I think it's important. There's a huge mental factor in being able to maintain pressure to a reasonable standard, even when fatigued. And that was Burgess's big thing. And, pushing through that barrier is that to keep that pressure up, even when you're tired. And we didn't do that. And worryingly, this was a real concern. I'm not sure about you guys, but it seemed to me a hell of a lot of finger pointing and hoping teammates would cover the spread. And, there just didn't seem to be that team effort. The only player I really thought to myself had cracked in hard, who seemed to go up a level, was Sparrow. He really, seemed to crack in hard in that last quarter, and there was almost zero third man in defensively, which I thought was a huge worry. And that's also a sort of effort thing. That's a mental thing to push to that contest. So I thought that was, a big factor in. I just think we look cooked, but they need to push through that. Just some curious stats. We had 2 more shots on goal than them. We had shots per inside 50, 51% to 44. So we were up on that stat as well, 7.1% more times when we went inside 50. So they're both really positives, 2 more shots at goal. Expected score I mentioned, I touched on, but Collingwood's expected score was 71.2. Ours was 61.8. Take it for however you want to take it in terms of expected score. I know a lot of people hate it, and I count you amongst them, Andy, but the reality is expected score is what's that? It's not even a 5-point win, so it's a 4.4, to Pies, which is, guess, partly what Goody's talking about. This one was really curious. Disposal efficiency, I thought we'd be, way behind. We were 69.1 to 71.8, down a little bit, not too bad. Our kicking efficiency was down 62.4 to 68.4. 6% is a fair bit, but it wasn't as many as I expected it might be. And just lastly, the ruck contests were really curious, as my dog goes nuts in the background, and this one's for you, George, is that, you've talked about how they're using Gawn. Gawn went to 78 ruck contests. JVR only went to 4 and Harrison Petty went to 4. So that meant that of the ruck contests, Maxi was at 91% of them. Compare that to 23. He was only averaging 57.5% of ruck contests. Obviously, we had Grundy. But previously, up to this game, it was averaging 82.9. So they really, really, it was good for JVR, I thought, but geez, they really worked Gawny over, and it speaks to that challenge. And I'm not sure if you had a thought about how they used Maxi, George.
Yeah, I'll talk about it when we get to the midfield. It was pretty appalling, quite frankly. Pretty poor reaction to what was going on. I mean, I don't think it's Max's problem. I think it's the midfield coaching group, but we'll talk about that in a specific area.
Yeah, and I mean, that's good. And I think that's a really good point because, it's easy to criticise the midfield players, but it's the systems that are set up that they follow. Having that free sort of gap out the back that it seemed that they were taking advantage of. Darcy Cameron, when at like third of his hit-outs were to advantage, and Maxi was had one of his season lowest hit-outs to advantage. So, but I thought it was really curious. They really worked him hard. The benefit to Rui is we saw how much more dynamic he can be when, he's not being flogged in the ruck.
All right. Let's get into the listener questions and see if we've got any answers. Well, let's not bury the lead. Let's talk about Braden Maynard. El Diablo asks for our thoughts on players being nice and polite to Collingwood's, I had to censor one of the words, number 4. I'd be fuming if I was Gus. Lazy says, a section of Demonland believes that we needed to roughen up Maynard to send a message and stick up for our former teammate. I'm all for a little flag flying from time to time, but would this have actually helped us win the football game? It kind of feels like some people just wanted blood regardless of the result. Dr. Gonzo replies, I didn't want blood, but I did want physicality, not directed at Maynard either, just a bruising style around the ground. A Maynard bounty gate would have been counterproductive, but there is still room in footy to make them earn it with a hard-hitting attack on the footy and opponent. And Lazy replies, absolutely, I was all for making him earn it and letting him know that we were there. But how much extra was there to gain by slamming him into next week? It's burying the lead in my view, and the truth is that we weren't hard enough on balance. And Supreme Demon asks, other players at the Melbourne Football Club mentally weak? We had the 10th anniversary of Free's MMD for the King's birthday, and the inspirational Dill Danaher come to the club and spoke to the players earlier in the week. We had the fact that we were playing against the team in Collingwood that we should have smoked, according to Stephen May at the 2023 Best and Fairest last year. We had the censored Braden Maynard, who almost killed their beloved teammate Angus Brayshaw and was forced to retire due to concussion-related injuries. Nobody from the Demons went after him. In fact, after the game, the players are smiling and giving hugs. If Angus Brayshaw was watching the game, he probably wanted to spew up. There was also the fact that we got belted by Fremantle the week before up in Alice Springs and we needed to respond. What happened? Nothing. It was all talk and no action. When all is said and done, more is said than done. Quite appropriate words by Neil Daniher. The Melbourne Football Club is an utter embarrassment and the players and coaching staff need a good hard look at themselves during the bye. 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗲 responds, mind you, every time Neil Daniher comes to the game, it may be his last one. What more inspiration do the players need? If Goodwin can't do it, at least do it for the people like Neil Daniher and Gus. FFS. Got a voicemail from Salty. Which one's?
I was just so disappointed by our hardness today. They were so much harder at the ball, so much more willing to contest the ball, and we were just limp-wristed.
I got also one from Roaster. Where are you, Roaster? Here we go.
G'day, Andy, George, and Bin Man, and Roaster here again. After, unfortunately, another bitterly disappointing day at the MCG. I guess we will go through this, and I don't necessarily know if I have a question, but I just sort of wanted to reach out and try and figure out why this has unravelled so quickly. What's changed since the Geelong game, when I was so excited about the season and the potential final series and all that sort of stuff, and we go from that, and then we sort of look really poor against Carlton for the first quarter, and manage to come back and then go over to the West and really get obliterated there. Come back, have a crack against St Kilda, and look good for a half, but I think that was, looking at it now, probably more St Kilda's poor effort than ours. So then Freo absolutely smashing us, and yesterday us once again, unfortunately, not really looking all that interested. I was disappointed with the lack of fight. Isn't necessarily, well, probably is. I wanted a showing after Fremantle, and the fact that it was Collingwood and Braden Maynard. I wanted something to show they cared and showed that a little bit. We didn't want them to do anything stupid, but the fact they went out there and shook hands, and to be honest, Collingwood looked more up for it in the first minute than we did. And, the fact that in the fourth quarter they didn't really go in and try and crack in and win it, just let it all kind of happen. So anyway, boys, tough gig. Forward to the pod.
Roadstar had a few more points than just the hardness. That was it. Then the hardness stuff, but he got it in late, and I didn't have time to chop it up, so I put it all in there. But George, are we too nice? Should we have given Braden Maynard the welcome like Jack Watts received all those years ago, or that Langdon received in 22? Would that have been counterproductive? Before you answer, I'll just quickly give mine. Look, I don't think we needed to belt him, but I think we should have done something. I know it might have been counterproductive, and might have just one person just to given the instruction, just go and let him know that because maybe it would have put them off their game a little bit and then wanted to retaliate. I don't know. I just feel I don't think we had to do all game, but someone should have just let him know, and not nothing too illegal, but I don't know, something a bit rough. And just even around the field, I don't think we were rough enough in the game. Anyway.
That's right. Look, I think all of our listeners and the people who've sent in their comments, and even you then, Andy, have got it right. The days of thuggery are over. Maynard, despite what you might think, was within the rules at the time. It wasn't right, but that was within the rules. There is nothing to be gained from going out there and someone laying into him. What was really disappointing was you don't need to shake hands with players like that before the game. You don't need to shake hands with players like that after the game.
Yeah.
You just ignore them and let them know that you've caused a serious brain injury to one of our players in the past. You just don't be nice to them. You don't accept it. And that's what appeared to me. We were accepting of what had gone on, and people say, "Oh, let's move on," and all that sort of thing. Well, maybe no, because Gus Brayshaw can't move on. What you needed to do was do it during the game, not not an act of thuggery, but limit his exposure during the game and his capabilities. I think he had the highest metres gained in for the whole side, 570 metres. He was just being let do what he wants to, and we didn't do anything about it. That was the more disappointing. You don't need to go and belt him one in the head. You need to stop him from being effective. So Supreme Demon has pointed it out, particularly with Neal Danaher's quote, when all is said and done, a lot more is said than done, and that was exactly what was the case in this game. You've got to make sure you do something. It doesn't have to be, shouldn't be thuggery, but you have to do something about him. We let him get away with it. As another commentator in Demonland noted today, when everybody said they're disappointed you didn't hit him in the back of the head or whatever, he said, that was 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗁𝘀𝗁. He said, I'm disappointed they didn't go after the ball or the player with the ball more. Yeah. Instead of worrying about Maynard, how about you show what you're meant to be doing, which is what Neal Danaher was telling everybody. You've got to do something, not just stand there and talk about it, not talk about it before the game or after the game. It was very disappointing from that perspective. We let him play the game exactly how he wanted to, and he did. And that's a real indictment on all sorts of people.
Big man, anything to add on that front?
To be honest, I'm not sure how I feel about it. It wasn't nearly as gnarly as I thought it would be. I wasn't going to go, and George invited me along, so maybe the members is a little bit more staid than what I'm used to. I don't know, but I couldn't muster the energy to boo him. I was too worried about how rubbish we were playing to get energy to boo Maynard. So I felt a little bit like I couldn't get into the spirit of of getting stuck into Maynard either. I mean, it is distressing with Gus, and I wonder what impact that's had, because there's, it's clear that was a one-off deal of this idea he was going to be, on the bench. That was that's it. He's not at the club anymore, and I would suggest he's probably struggling with post-AFL career. So I'm more distressed about that. I could, care less about Maynard. As to whether we should have been tougher, we weren't tough anywhere. It's sort of, I think, more the point about, the contested ball numbers were high, but I wonder, if they were slightly inflated, because our pressure numbers were not. And our tackle numbers, that's where you get stuck in the players, and it felt like Captain Jack Sparrow, as I said, was the only one who was really in that last quarter super cracking in, which sort of goes more to, to my theory that I think they're cooked. I don't think they had the energy. They looked flat in the warm-up. They looked flat coming out onto the ground. It just was a funny vibe, and, I know we'll get into it a little bit, but so, let's hope that doesn't point to some sort of bigger problem that's there under the surface that we're not aware of. Hopefully I'm right and they're cooked. Hopefully I'm also right that it's intentional, or at least it's some, there's a plan, there's some plan there. But I'm just sick of getting beaten by Collingwood, to be honest. I really sort of tuned out the whole Maynard stuff.
Oops, I was on mute. All right. Bates Mate says, my pet hate is running past for a handball and not knowing where you are going to kick it, only to rush a kick to the opposition. Rivers is a serial offender, followed closely by the hot potato handball to a player flat-footed in a worse position. Clary, I'm looking at you. Dr. Gonzo asks, where to from here? How can we lose to Collingwood the same way every time we play them? Bar the King's birthday game last year, where our game plan dismantled them, yet they almost came back to pinch it at the death. We have lost 4 out of the last 5 against them in almost exactly the same fashion. They force us to the pockets, taking low percentage shots, leading to plenty of behinds, then get us on the rebound to walk it in for easy goals in an open forward line. What does it say for our system when we seem to totally fall apart after losing one key player, Lever, whereas Collingwood have a third of their best 22 out and plug in a number of rookies and are still able to execute a winning game plan? What can we learn from a Pies side that always turns up to play regardless of personnel? Travie14 says, G'day gents, very, very disappointing month. Goody had built a contested, hard-nosed style of football that complemented our mids perfectly. Viney, Petrarca, Oliver could get down and dirty and do what they do best. It's clear that he has tried to implement forward handballing into our game, but it doesn't suit our list, and frankly, a lot in our team are not good at handballing. The amount of times a player has to stop his momentum to wait for the ball to arrive is frustrating. The players look lost with this new system and haven't bought into it fully, I don't think. My question is, we have been top 4 for 3 years and last year lost one final by 7 points and the other by 2. The first with a makeshift forward line and the second with no forward line. Why have we made such a drastic change to our game style when we were that close? And it is a drastic game style change. Handball more, possess the ball more, use the corridor more. I feel Goody and co have jumped at shadows a bit here. We tried to go back to the old Melbourne a bit this game, but this clearly confused the players and they looked confused and lacked confidence. We are now fighting to make finals and fighting to find which style of football we want to play. That's not a good position to be in at this stage of the year with the ladder as tight as it is. Have a good week off, guys. You have earned it. Bucknaked says, nothing is ever as good or as bad as it seems. Have we lost our way? It feels that we are modifying our game plan and have lost our DNA. We seem confused and have a lack of confidence in what we are doing. Can you please discuss and maybe help me see a bright side to all of this? So, Bin Man, is the problem our game plan? If so, do we ditch it and revert back to the 21 to 23 game plan? Or is it not as simple as just being able to flick a switch? Or do the problems lie elsewhere and are much deeper?
Well, I mean, it depends on a few factors. This is where I'm coming from. So I think that their plan is that they'll revert. They come finals. So I don't think that this is this is the model. You're laughing because you don't worry about making finals.
At the moment, we're going to make it, buddy.
Yeah,
not you.
Of course we do. Of course we do. Right. So, but this is, I think, the plan that they put in at the beginning of the season. So to introduce a style that isn't so crash and bash. I mean, again, let's
talked about it. We've talked about
at the end of 22 and at the end of 23. If you were to poll Demonland posters, for instance, 80% of people would have said we have to move away from this game plan because it's not sustainable. There's even a question here that says the same thing. The game plan of smash, bash, forward half, smash it in, brutal rugby style AFL football is not sustainable in the long term. And I don't think it is. I agree with that. Playing the way that we played in 22 is probably the best example. We played that model all the way to the mid-season, and come finals, we were the walking wounded. It's not a model that you can play all season. Now, I think that's why this year, I think as I've talked about, fitness is a massive issue. That's the winning model, but teams can't play it. They can only do it occasionally. If you look at the top 8 at the moment, it makes for a really curious reading. You've got 2 teams in the top 8, the Giants, who have lost 4 of their last 5. You've got Cats, who are in 5th position, so 4 more points than us. They've also lost 4 of their last 5. Port Adelaide have 2 of their last 5. But before that, they were on a bit of a streak. Essendon have lost their last 2. They're in 3rd position. The Pies, who, fair play to them winning yesterday, but prior to that, they'd lost and then a draw. All teams, Gold Coast, who were up and about the previous week, could only manage 48 points against the Saints. And they've gone 2 losses out of their last 5. We're 4 from our last 5. So, I say that not by way of, making an excuse for Melbourne, but just pointing out the reality. This season there has already been a much bigger range of anomalous results than there has been in other seasons. And as I said, I follow this stuff pretty closely in terms of my punting. And every single year for the last 5 to 6 years around the bye period, there's a whole range of crazy results. Like on a dry deck, at Marvel, under the roof, a team that scored 160 points against Cats could only score 48 points, admittedly, against a defensive side, but still 48 points on, completely perfect conditions. They're the sorts of crazy results. And we're in that mix at the moment. And we know, we've talked about this on the podcast every year for the last 3 years, the crazy results that we've had, the loss to Geelong, the loss to Freo, these are the matches that happen at the moment. So I think we'll revert to a different model because I just don't think that crash and bash is sustainable for 22 matches. I think that was the plan. Whether they'll stick to the plan goes a bit to where I'm right about the fitness stuff. Whether, I also think that I'm hoping that they're looking to ramp up their fitness as they approach the end of the season. If that's right, they've got a plan. Hopefully they stick to it. But I totally agree with the comments that we seem to be stuck between two stools and the players are finding it difficult to adjust. Like I said, in this match was a classic one where kick it was the right call half the time. And even I almost yelled out kick it at the footy. It's like, just get it 60 metres down the ground. And they do look a little bit confused. I mean, it must be for a system-based side, it must be really difficult to have it drilled in, for week after week after week, a way of playing and then say, look, we want you to adjust in this game coming up, particularly for a team so system-based as Goody. And I thought the presser, did you watch the presser, Andy?
Yeah, I watched bits of it. I was pretty angry when I watched.
Yeah, well, it's worth watching for his response, Goody's response to the question about what will the bye period look like. And I reckon, I hope the players weren't watching the press or haven't watched it, because his immediate reaction before he could catch himself was to say training. And then he says, and they'll give them a break. And it's like, right, well, the players probably not keen on training at the moment. But, I think that model isn't what we're going to end up with. I don't think it's a model that, transition turnover, that we're particularly well suited. We're built around the crash and bash style. I think all teams head towards that crash and bash style as we, come to the finals. And Melbourne, if, we're in shape, we'll still be there. We're going to make the 8. Top 4's, increasingly looking, more difficult, or some would argue impossible. I'm not saying it's impossible, and it's hard to win from outside the top 4, but footy is a lot more volatile at the moment than it's been for a long time, and you just got to look at the ladder.
It feels like we're closer to the bottom 4 than the top 4 at the moment.
But that's of course, but that's confirmation bias, and I'm sure.
No, it's
I've got a mate who's a Cats fan,
bias.
Right? And so they've lost 4 of their last 5. He's not worried. Like, it's Melbourne fan have got this collective scar tissue. Like I said last week, I've followed Melbourne for a long time, so my coping strategy is looking positively at, so you can go the other way and go, it's going to be terrible. We're going to go down the bottom. But my mate who's a passionate Cats fan, he doesn't feel that about the Cats. It doesn't rock his boat that they've lost 4 of the last 5, one of which was 160 points. He's like, well, we're 5th, we're 6th, we'll just look at the history. And so he doesn't have that scar tissue that Melbourne fans have, and the same deal with Hawks fans, to be honest.
Let's move on. El Diablo asks, is Simon leaving? How soon? Thank you. And for a more measured question on the topic, Lou from Facebook asks, my question is about the future of Goodwin. I haven't been in the sack Goodwin camp since mid-2020. I'd like to add, I think there is an appalling amount of disrespect lashed out towards Goodwin, considering he's our only living premiership coach. However, there are mounting issues we can't ignore. Most of our last games are against last home games are against interstate teams. It will be hard to see us attracting decent crowds unless there is a big change after the bye. I do worry that this will cause a ripple effect that will lead to fewer numbers and fewer primetime games in 2024, making it harder for us to attract big-name trades and free agents. Is Goodwin in trouble, or will the board look to try and recruit better people around him and maybe ask some tough questions of our fitness team? So, George, it hasn't taken long for some knives to start coming out for the coach. Goody is still contracted until the end of 2026, and as Lou stated, he is our only living premiership coach. He has runs on the board in terms of wins and losses over the last 3 to 4 years. However, we have had those 2 straight set exits, and if our current form continues, we simply aren't going to make finals. Any thoughts around that, or we shelve it for a couple of weeks and see what happens after the bye?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right, particularly the North Melbourne game. Look, every time any coach is losing, as we have, 4 games out of the previous 5, you're going to be in trouble as a coach. However,
there's a lot of anger on social media. I know both of you aren't really on social media, but there's a lot of anger out there, more so than on Demonland.
and look, the Melbourne supporters should be angry, with what they're seeing on the field. They're totally expected. I think we might be in a similar situation to what Richmond was when Hardwick was coaching around about 2015, 2016, I think it was. It's not the senior coach is the problem. It's the problem is the people around him. And I think we're starting to see, and I'll talk about this later when we talk about the midfield. I don't think we've got the right people at the club at the moment who are there to support him. I don't think they're all that good at their job from what I'm seeing. There's people who've been there for a long time and we're not getting what we would and should expect out of them. We're just not seeing the results on the board. For example, Choco, he's been running these kicking academies for a number of years now, and yet we can't kick straight. There has to be a question about what value we're getting out of a coach like that. I think we seriously underestimate the loss of 𝗍𝗍.
Absolutely.
Particularly since he was in charge of the midfield. I think he was also not just in charge of the midfield, but he was the game day coach effectively, and tactically he has been, I think. We won a premiership with 𝗍𝗍 as an assistant coach, and I think he's proven himself at Richmond to be tactically superior to, with a team that's just absolutely decimated with injury and also lack of talent at the end of the day that they've currently got. And while they've only won a couple of games, they have been competitive in each and every single game they've been in. Which we're not seeing, and we've had classic examples of that against Fremantle and West Coast in particular. So I think the problem is not so much Simon Goodwin. It might be the problem with Simon Goodwin. I don't know, but I suspect you've got to put the right people around the coach to be able to support him and provide him with the correct and knowledgeable inputs to be able to get the outcomes that we desire.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough gig being a coach, isn't it? And I mean, on that point, George, is that, I think that's where I've been critical of the club for a number of years now and their investments in the comm space. And that's, I often feel like Goody's left to swing in the breeze a little bit. Like, he's either in the media a lot or he's not. And, he's not a natural media performer. So I just feel like he's left out there by himself a fair bit. And I think you make a really good point about, 𝗍𝗍. It's really hard to tell, isn't it, what you lose when you lose someone as 𝗍𝗍. And I think your point's a good one as well about the game day coach, because Goody is, down on the ground. That's the way he coaches in the interchange box. He's not seeing it from up above and he needs a good relationship. But I wonder also too, George, the role that Burgess played with Goody. They seemed really close, and he was often referred to as another coach Burgess, and he was on the bench. I'm not, I have no idea whether Goody has the same relationship with Selwyn Griffith. Maybe he does. So
I've seen Selwyn on the bench, but not in the way that I used to see Burgess sort of marshalling the troops.
Yeah, very proactive Burgess, wasn't he? Yeah, that's right.
So I've seen Selwyn there, but not in the same capacity.
Even
and that's not to say he's not calling some shots or saying stuff, but he's not physically or visibly.
It's hard to tell. So maybe, I think that's a really good point. Just on that, George. So hopefully I agree that if we're in the same spot as the Tigers were in 2016, then we've got 3 flags coming our way in the next little while. So, I've long believed that the role of the coach is overrated. I just don't. I really believe that is that. Look at Clarkson since he left the Hawks. Success doesn't. The world sport is littered with super successful coaches who leave their club and never win anything afterwards. And AFL is exactly the same. We only need to look at Barras coming to the D's was the sort of classic example of it. He wasn't going to make us into premiers, but we didn't have the cattle, and we never got the cattle for him. I think that's there's too much emphasis placed on who's coaching is my view.
All right, let's move on. Wells 11 says, I can't quite put my finger on it, but there seems to be a definite lack of buzz or joy or energy in this group at this point. I can't help but wonder about what's going on behind the scenes. Do you feel the same? And we've got a great voicemail from Wise D-Man on the calls about confidence and psychology to playing footy. B-Man, jump in with your response when it finishes. I don't have these in order.
Hey, boys. Wise D-Man here. Nice to talk. I've actually never commented or called or anything, but desperate times. Anyway, I want to take on a bit of a different angle to where I think we're at and what's going wrong. You know, a lot's talked about in terms of we live in a physical world, so unless we can touch it or see it or hear it or feel it, it's not real. But I want to touch on the psychology and the spiritual part of, I guess, humans and sport. If you look at when we won it in 21, something about us, like a togetherness, we had a connection, chemistry. We had that X factor. I remember Jack Rewalt talking about it, that there's something about Melbourne this year. And I certainly felt it then. If you look at Sydney this year, they've got it. Collingwood had it the year before when they won the flag. Geelong the year before that. And, to quote the great Dennis Denudoff, the castle, it's just the vibe. And I haven't felt the vibe all year. There's something off from an energy perspective, from a psychology perspective. And to dismiss psychology being a factor, simply, I believe, is ignorant. I see a group of guys that are just mentally struggling. As Big Man, you talk about with training loads, affecting disposal and decision-making, your psychology is such a huge part of this. And I just see a group of guys that are really struggling. My reasons, I guess that's up for the interpretation. But I think we'd be ignorant to ignore the off-field stuff that happened in the pre-season. I think that's definitely affected the group. The other part is it reminds me a lot of 2019 in the off-season where there was a lot of guys missing a lot of training. If you've got a group of 10 to 15 guys that are underdone, they haven't done a pre-season, they're not confident in themselves, they're not confident in their bodies, that's like a cancer that can spread through. And I don't know, it reminds me a lot of 2019. I think we have guys that are underdone. I think we had a lot of guys that missed pre-season, and again, this affects the psychology, and this is what I see is what's going wrong. I don't think it's, the end of our potential flag window, and I think there are some changes that are needed, however. But anyway, I'd be interested to know your guys' thoughts on this. So I'm loyal as always and forever, and I hope many other supporters continue to be the same. So go D's.
B-Man, before you jump in, you were talking about loading before, and you sort of said that can, the fitness and all that can affect it. But I think just as critical and just as important is the mental aspect and the confidence. And I think Rose Star has hit on something here. I think whatever went on pre-season or any of the issues going on besides, maybe they are taking their toll now. And, psychology is a big factor, and perhaps that's having some effect.
Wise D, you mean?
Oh, Wise Rose Star was earlier. Yeah, Wise D, man. Sorry for that.
Yeah, I mean, those two questions I agree with. I mean, I think that just taking the first part of it, the sort of Wells 11, that sort of lack of buzz, it feels like the last month. I mentioned this last week because if you go back to the first sort of stage of the year, there was this sort of bounce, I think, of, we talked about it, the culture of supporting Clary, that being a win, or, because you were thinking he may not even come back, Clary. Then we had the Gus situation. But, if you think back to the win over the Cats, we were well and truly, I mentioned this last week, we were well and truly up and about. At the Hawks game, we were pumped up and, we were celebrating. The team got around track for just spoiling a point, getting in to get a contest to get it through for a point. Clary was interviewed after the Cats game. He was up and about. The energy seemed really good, and there were a number of commentators that I heard talk about, the culture seems really strong and they're up and about. But I 100%, 1,000% agree with the call about the impact of psychology. I mean, sport's all about psychology. So, absolutely what you're saying is it's one thing, not so much just the training. Forget if they do increased blocks of training. At this stage of the year, the players are exhausted. Well, they started their first match was March 15th or something, or whenever the first game it was even before that, wasn't it? When was the first March? The first game of the year was early March with opening round. They're already, 4 months into the season. It's a super incredibly tough game. There's been injuries, a huge part of that, of all teams have dealt with it. The psychology, there's no doubt about it. And I'll give McRae a lot of credit. He's been really good in terms of that space. I think that's a really sort of good call around the impact of the off season. You don't know. I mean, it's hard to know, but it doesn't feel, there was a lack of cohesiveness, I thought, on the weekend. There was a lack of connection between the players. There was a lack of sort of, even after track went down, we haven't talked about that. I mean, that was sickening. George and I immediately saw he was down, and I was talking to Jordan. He looked in a bad way. Track is not a player to, he's not someone. He's a pretty tough bugger, and he was in a world of pain. And players went across to him. It wasn't so much that, but there wasn't really a sort of bounce back after that. Psychology, physical stuff and tiredness and fatigue. Psychology is a massive part of that. It's like, I'm not sure if certainly not a runner, but when you hear people talk about long distance running or cycling, long distance cycling, it's, everyone's super fit, but it's that ability to push yourself beyond that point. And that was Burgess's mantra, is that it's really about psychology. His belief, his sort of high performance belief, Burgess talks about a lot, was that it's not about whether players are the fittest in the AFL. It's whether they believe they're the fittest in the AFL. And he had Melbourne believing they were the fittest in the AFL. And there's a question about this in the Crows, but he had the Crows believing they were the fittest in the AFL in the last couple of years. So they won't be believing it this year probably, and nor is Melbourne. So I totally agree. And, I think that I'm probably guilty of anyone of sort of underestimating, for me at least, the impact of losing Gus, just on me as a fan. I mean, imagine how his teammates must feel. He's not just a player that we've lost from our midfield rotation. He's a glue player. He's one of those people in any organisations or group of people who connect people. If you take someone like that out, and that's the psychology aspect, you take someone like that out and at the same time bring someone vulnerable in like Clary, where, other leaders like Max might feel like they support him. Things like Langdon going to London for his sister's wedding, which I applaud. I think that's great. But sometimes that sort of thing in the midst of not playing well when we get beaten by the Eagles, that's the sort of stuff where psychology can start playing into things. And then it's a bit like I said before, I think it's a real thing. You see it in basketball all the time when a player gets the yips on 3-point shots. Is sometimes you just know they're not going to get it. And it feels like in, the psychology of those close games and the big moments that we're failing more often than we're, succeeding. And Goody talks a lot about, in the moments and standing up in the moments, and there's fewer of them to point to at the moment. So I 100%, I'm a huge believer in the psychology of sport, but also that buzz, that just didn't look like there was that buzz. So hopefully I think there's a real danger of throwing the baby out in the bathwater and panicking too much. And of course the signs don't look good. Of course, at the moment it's not looking great, but, reset 4 points out of the 8. A lot will become clear in the next 2 or 3 weeks, I think. But the psychology aspect of they've just got to get that right. The other one is Maisie. I mean, Maisie's body language, I don't know whether he's struggling still with his ribs. It would make sense, but he seems to be struggling, and his body language can be a bit variable at times, and I noticed it on the weekend. And he did something on the weekend that he never does. That spoil that he did in the point, I couldn't believe it, where he coughed up a goal. It was like, what are you doing, Maisie? And I hardly ever say that. Similarly with Turner. I mean, Turner, there was one point I was infuriated because this was a mental thing. Doesn't matter how tired you are, is that he took off late to get across to a player and then the player stopped. And it was one of those situations, if he'd just gone hard early, he didn't even have to run that fast. He would have caught him. And he didn't, and then looked stupid. And then the player just ran off down the wing.
The last couple of weeks, I've noticed that a few times where players, didn't do exactly what you said.
Yeah, start slow and then realise, actually, I've got a chance to get there. And then by then it's too late. And that happened, I'm probably picking on Disco, but it happened a lot. So, I think that's a really great call. I think personally Goody's underestimated in this space, but in terms of that psychological support. But maybe that goes to what George is saying. Where's the support for Goody? Who is our sports psychologist? Again, I talked about us as footy fans not knowing other teams' high performance managers. We know ours, but do we know who? I don't know who our psychologist is. Do either of you guys? Do we have a sports psychologist?
We do, because remember when we spoke to 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗲, he mentioned the people in the well-being space.
Yeah,
so I don't know if
well-being space
PhD
could be
or a psychologist or an actual PhD. I have no idea.
I thought Demonland was well-being space.
That's for the supporters, and it's not always healthy.
And just a final comment on that. I reckon one of the things I love about football and Australian rules football, and it makes it unique as a sport, is how many people are involved in playing it. And so therefore, if George follows basketball, the NBA finals are on at the moment, you can build a team around a franchise player, a Jokic or Giannis and so psychology is important, but there's only 5, 6, 7 8 players who, there's 23 players plus the injuries, 44 players on the list. There's human interaction, plus we learn more about the internal stuff now than we did 20 years ago. Personally, I don't want to hear about it. I don't care about what they do when they're off field. I don't want to know. I want to know about their personal life. I just want to know them about footballers.
But when it ends up in the papers and there's rumours online and whatever, what can you do? I know, but that all
piles on that psychological stuff, I think. And, and again, to be honest, it goes back to comms. That's what comms is about, keeping that stuff out of the media, not fueling it. That's where I get infuriated with the media pylon, and I get doubly.
Journalists, you got social media.
But comms' role is to manage that and insulate the players from that.
Yeah. Well, probably this next one works hand in hand with the one we were just talking about. So Pipe Fitter asks, is there something in our inaccuracy in big games? Can this club get its head around being a big club? Both finals last year and today. It can't be a coincidence. Dutch Demon says today's match, like so many this season, was a case of the other team waltzing into open goals while we missed every single shot. The expected score was only 2 points behind. Our defence has been shown up with lever out, and our team's kicking skills are ordinary across the field and in front of goal. Why? How can we fix this? I woke up at 6:45 a.m. and biked through torrential rain for 20 minutes to watch this in Amsterdam. That was the most pleasant 20 minutes of my morning. Wells 11 says, our kicking for goal was a mix of terrible but also unlucky. Cozzy hit the post. Was it 3 times? As poor as we looked, do you think if we kick straight, we're actually in that game, or am I clutching at straws? And we got in a very late voicemail from Matt, so I'll play that.
Hey guys, Matt here. I'm just calling up. I'm trying to get better at understanding the statistics. And my question is, does this game just come down to goal kicking accuracy, or is there more to it? I'm not great with the stats, but looking at it, it looks like both teams had almost equal inside 50s, and then Melbourne actually had a couple more shots on goal. So does it just come down to the fact we kicked 15 points and Collingwood kicked 15 goals? Or what more is there? Thanks, guys. Bye.
So, George, inaccuracy, poor skills. Can we pin this on psychology, big game pressure, loading fitness? Who or what can I blame for all of this, George? And is it just as Matt from Caulfield said, is it just simple if we kick straight and we win that game, or?
Well, in this case, yes.
My stats file a bit shortened.
Yes. If we'd kicked straight and we would have won that game, if Collingwood hadn't kicked so well, well, good luck to them, or good skill levels from them resulted in winning the game. Poor skill levels in front of goal killed us. I remember sitting next to Bin Man in the third quarter, and there was a statistic on the screen that came up. From set shots, they'd kicked 70%.
72%, I think it was.
Yeah, and we kicked 30.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just summed up the whole game in one statistic beautifully, poorly in this case. And again, I'll say it, thank goodness for JVR, because he was the only one who was kicking accurately, and he increased our statistics as a result of his accurate kicking. Just as equally, when you look at the overall kicking, we're kicking, from general play as well as set shots, we're kicking at less than 25% in this game. It's just not good enough at AFL level, that sort of stuff. It's killing us. And again, I'll come back to it. What are we doing about it? It's been a problem for us for the last 2 years. Accuracy in front of it. We're getting it inside 50. Goody came out in his press conference and said, "Yeah, we're getting the inside 50s compared to last week's."
And contest was good.
Yep, and that's fine. But we're not kicking accurately when we're given the opportunities to score goals.
Someone who asked a question earlier mentioned that we've had less inside 50s than St Kilda this year.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that makes the job even harder. But when you do get it in there, you've got to take full advantage of it. Cost us a game, cost us finals last year. Inaccuracy.
It cost us how much is it? It's not just, it cost us so many finals.
Yeah.
It's our Achilles heel. Really, Matt's right in a way, because it's also an intersection with the psychology. Because if we kick 2 or 3 of those early goals, we're up and about, the crowd's in it. The expected score, as I said, was 4 points. That it did. In the end of the day, that's the thing for Goody, but he must feel like he's just repeating, like I said, Groundhog Day, because this is in the last 4 years, without exaggeration, there'd be at least 10 games, wouldn't there, where you could point to just extreme inaccuracy being the reason we lost. Like I said before, 10-1 from turnover is crazy good from Collingwood, but it was 4 whatever we was, 4-12 or whatever from our turnover. We just didn't take our chances. And and it was, George, it was anyone who wasn't at the ground, you could not have got a better day for footy. There was not a breath of wind. Yeah. There was none of that sort of autumn dew. It was perfect for footy. So no excuses. And it is where the psychology comes into it. They tighten up, and each miss, the crowd, you can feel it. Like I was feeling it.
Yeah.
In fairness to, go ahead, George.
I bemoan this constantly. I'm astounded, not only at Melbourne's inaccuracy, but the inaccuracy of all AFL players in front of goal. If you stick a basketballer on the foul throw line, they'll get it 80 to 90% of the time. AFL from 30 metres straight in front
should be 80, 90%.
It should be the same, but it's not as simple as that.
It's not, even in games we've won, accuracy is a problem for us. And so in terms of the ladder, really is, if I was putting my full objective cap on, the big problem that the ladder is 28 points is, as I said, we're only 4 points from fourth, but the big issue is 101%. 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, we're up around 120%. We've dropped 20% in 2 weeks. And that's, that doesn't happen without being inaccurate, but it is definitely our Achilles heel. And I think that there is an intersection with the psychology, and, we're tightening up in big moments. And there were a couple, it wasn't just our kicking, it was our decision making, where I forget who was kicking inside 50, but they had 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝗁𝘀𝗁 free on one side, and I think it was Fritter free on the other. And somehow we got that, maybe it was Bowie kicking in, and he hesitated, ball got smothered, goes down the other end of the ground, and, there's a 2-goal turnaround effectively, and that was all about pressure.
And Fritsch early in the game as well, there was one where he just hesitated that 1 second to kick it to 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝗁𝘀𝗁 on one side and JVR.
I think that was
he hesitated
and
got smothered, and they took it down and kicked a goal.
Yeah.
In fairness to Collingwood's accuracy from when they burnt us on turnovers, they just opened us up so much that they were taking all their shots from point blank range.
Well, I mean, not so that. I mean, they also slotted.
Yeah, Kruger.
Every time we missed one, Kruger kicked one from even further out than Turner. We don't, Kozzy missed ones from the angle. Who was it? Cameron who kicked it from the boundary line.
Yep.
Yeah.
So their kicking was phenomenal, really.
Yeah. Lazy says, not going to use the dreaded L word, but both sides were pretty off. I thought we, in particular, made a lot of horrible skill error mistakes in bad areas that could only be explained by fatigue. For instance, Fritsch in the middle a few times and May taking contested mark and handballing into Jack Crisp a metre away. It also happened early against Freo when we went forward through the middle. Kozzy gathered beautifully and then scrubbed the kick about 10 metres along the ground. June is notorious for these kinds of games, but my word, they are ugly to watch when terrible skills come out of nowhere. Radish D says, pondering the last month or so of footy, the two most disappointing sides have been Melbourne and Adelaide, with Burgess in charge of fitness at the Crows and Griffiths, a Burgess acolyte, in charge of fitness at the Ds. Is there something common in the training of these two sides that could be causing these results? Are the training methods out of date? Are they training in a hard block in May that's going to pay dividends in the rest of the season? Is there too much focus on fitness and not enough on skills? It just seems interesting to me that those two sides who should be fit are languishing at present. We've got a voicemail from G from Brisbane, not really on the loading, but pertaining to teams coming off a bye and preparation for byes. So I'll give that a play.
Hello, it is G calling from Brisbane. I am located interstate, and so I just wanted to check in after the game today as to whether maybe it was played on spongy grass and perhaps a condition that we shouldn't be playing in like we did in the Alice. No, in all seriousness, I didn't think we played too badly today. I don't think the score really reflects how we played. But my question is, tipping against the teams that are coming off a bye seems to not be working in my favour this year, whereas last year it seemed to work quite well. It felt like last year most of the teams coming off a bye had a fair bit of loading and so therefore lost their games after that, whereas this year seems to be a different approach. So I'm interested to hear the team's thoughts on that and what they think the Ds will be doing going into their bye week. I also just want to say that I loved the putting the hope in hopeless last week. I think we weren't hopeless this week, but fingers crossed we can really come good post-bye. Go the Ds. Thanks for the podcast. Love listening and have a wonderful evening. Bye.
Thank you, G. Big man, not asking you to defend or go into the whole principles of loading. I think you did a good job last week of expressing your opinions or relating to our performances this season in regards to that. Do you have any comments in particular on the fortunes of the two most recent clubs that have been exposed to the Burgess effect? And perhaps you can answer G's question regarding coming off bye and what the Ds will or should do besides having a little break and training and bringing.
Yeah, I might go backwards and answer G's first. That's really interesting because she's right. There's been a much less discernible pattern this year, and this is a hobby horse of mine. Speaking of putting things in things is. The AFL put the fix in fixture because it's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. They start the season a week early, give 6 clubs or whatever it was who played in that opening round 2 byes for the season. So throw programs completely out of whack. George mentioned last week, Libby, in that Age article, Libby Birch, I'm right in saying, George, the sort of thrust of what she was saying is teams are training in blocks. Teams are clearly taking different...
And it's changed, particularly this year, from what it was in the past.
In terms of?
In terms of the way you've trained and prepared players. You can't afford to do it in one block. like
Exactly. So teams are doing it in several blocks instead of what has been happening, in the last few years, which is the pre-season's the big block and then you get to the middle of the season and then fill up the tank again and get to the end of the season. They're doing that in blocks because, I wonder whether that model is sustainable in terms of, that's where the question mark came. That's what that article was about, that Libby Birch was quoted in, was the number of AFL injuries, the injuries in AFL. And they were wondering whether training has something to do with it. And, it probably does. So it is really variable this year. And I mentioned before, there's some really weird results. So, I suspect, this is one for Swamp Thing, Andy, maybe ask him on, on Twitter or X or whatever it's called, is when was the last time in AFL history that a team was 5th and a team was 8th at any point in the season, having lost 4 of their previous 5 games. I mean, that is really quite an incredible stat. And is anyone writing Giants off? I mean, seriously, this is not a wind-up sort of question. I don't know. Are either of you guys thinking Giants are not a chance at winning the flag this year?
No, I'm still with the Giants. They were cheated out of one game at least.
So, they've lost 4 of their last 5 and not been very impressive in a couple of those losses, not West Coast getting beaten or the 90 points, but Cats as well. Cats, probably George would write the Cats off. He did at the beginning of the season, but they're still above Giants and in 5th place. I don't say that I say it to G's point about the weird results this season. There's going to be more for the next few weeks. And because the other thing that the AFL have done with the bye period is spread it over how many weeks? 4 or 5 weeks? That throws, if you combine the fact that there was the opening round, some teams were having their bye. So who was it? Geelong played on the weekend. I'm trying to think. Was it Geelong had not had a bye and Swans had 2 already? I think I'm right in saying.
Yeah. There was certainly one team was in that situation. I can't remember.
I think it was the Cats played the Swans. So playing the top of the table team. No bye yet for the Swans, no bye yet for the Cats, and the Swans had 2. I mean, that's just nuts. I mean, and they looked gassed in the last quarter. I'm not sure if you watched that game. That was a great game for the first half because the Cats were up and about, but completely stopped. So I think it's a really created, really volatile sorts of games of footy, and there's going to be lots more of these for the next 4, 5, 6 weeks before things settle in August or sort of mid-August. We've already seen some of the results, but it was really interesting that comment about Burgess and also Selwyn Griffith, because, and this is, I promise this is not the case, I didn't see that question, and on a separate thread in the post-game thread in response to sort of a similar comment, but I wrote that I think it's a reasonable question whether the kamikaze hardcore training regime Burgess introduced, and Selwyn has really carried that on. He I think 2-3 years, George, and he was sort of his understudy, wasn't he, Selwyn? At least one.
At least 2, 1 or 2.
Yeah, and the plan was it was a transition to him, and so I think he's taken on board a lot of his philosophy. So that hardcore training regime that Burgeon introduced and Selwyn has carried it on. I think it's a reasonable question whether it's sustainable long term. As I noted before, I've heard lots of players over the last few years and Burgess make this point that say that we train harder than any other team and that our training is often harder than the games. I personally find that hard to believe, but I've heard Burgess say that multiple times. If you remember back to the 21 flag, they talked about how hard that match was in the lead up, the one that they played in the gap between the prelim. It can only be, you'd think, a really hard model for senior players to deal with for 5, 6, 7 seasons, which is what they're up to now. Super hard for young players like Windsor and all of the rest of the young players, but particularly Windsor, who's been in the ones all season, to maintain that model and train under that way. But I reckon, and this sort of goes to that sort of comment about psychology, it must be even more difficult to maintain that level, particularly if there's any drop-off, by the core senior leaders. And you've got players who, Clary and others who have had interrupted pre-season, as, it's one of the truisms of football that we've talked about that always impacts their ability to get to optimal fitness, and they just basically never do through the season. But if the senior leaders are sort of even dropping off imperceptibly, how hard is it for we've got 8-9 young players in that in our 23, under 23, 24. How hard is it for them to get up, particularly at this point of the season? And it's or is it a coincidence that the Crows, who looked the fittest side in 22 and 23 in Burgess's first 2 years, this year look one of the least fit. Like they look like they're struggling a bit like us in terms of their fitness. They're just not running on top of the ground as well as they were. And the score, their percentage and their scoring is reflecting that. As I've talked about, I'm hoping against, perhaps against hope that we have deliberately looked to dial that intensity down this season with the goal of ramping it up closer to the finals. And that sort of speaks to what, George, that point about Libby Birch of them taking different approaches to the high performance program. That might explain, if it's the case. So I'm hoping it is, and we don't know, so why not hope it is? That might explain our clear lack of run and clearly being miles off optimal fitness in the last month. I mean, we just haven't looked, up and about running on top of the ground. Even that Cats game we didn't, but since the Hawthorn game really is when we've really looked like we're running as well as we can. So I'm hoping that this is part of the strategy, but. As you've talked about, Andy, you've got to make it, and it's no fun, is it? It's no fun watching us, look like we're running with concrete in the boots. And
I'm on virginaustralia.com booking tickets for flights in September. As we speak, B-Man.
Andy, you've got MFCSS, and I've got Pollyanna syndrome, which is sort of the opposite. It's like a brainworm that it just makes me, reframe everything into a positive.
Well, on the positive side, I'm not going to have to worry with trying to secure tickets on Ticketek come finals. Those stressful mornings. Okay, let's move on. At the break of Gawn says, another poor performance from our midfield. I'm glad Goody acknowledged how bad we are at centre clearances and clearances in general in his presser. It makes it very difficult to play a strong territory game when you get smashed in clearances. I also think 𝗍anie is really struggling. Who knows if he's injured or not, but only 19 disposals, only one clearance when at 53% and only 20 pressure acts. I'm just not sure what we do with him. How can we overcome this clearance problem in the middle? Is it the player mix, or is it more of a positioning and strategy thing? We've got a voicemail from Salty.
Boys, what a horrible game. Salty here. A few things. I just hate hearing that we have this A-grade midfield. We just don't. We once maybe had it, but we're just not an A-grade midfield at all. We're getting absolutely killed in there. Track, Gawn and Track, yes, but Track doesn't play that all the time. 𝗍anie and Clarry are miles down, and aside from them, I really don't know who else goes in there. 𝗍ecie can pinch hit, but what have we got else other than them? We are really bereft of any midfield strength.
So, George, seems we're getting this question every week now. What's happened to our A-grade midfield? Can it even be considered A-grade? Who else can we run through there, and who's going to cover Track's loss in the coming weeks? And
it's not a pretty picture. Like I said, I'd invite people to go and have a look at Jeff White's Facebook page. Jeff, of course,
posted one of the things he did today.
Yeah, it is absolutely first class. He's done an analysis on Collingwood's setup at the centre bounces in this game, and basically Collingwood played their players constantly to Max's right hand because that's his main hit out zone. We didn't change anything. We should have been altered, or the assistant coaches should have noticed that really quickly during the game and made the alterations. You've got 4 chances during the game to adjust that with the midfield, and they didn't. What it resulted was these centre clearances that just while they didn't affect us, they could have done some serious damage. I think it was 14-6, wasn't it? The centre bounce clearances. That's a big difference for a team that's supposedly got an A-grade midfield, and I think we still are A-grade, but not when they're being set up poorly in the first place, or Collingwood is setting them up to take full advantage. Max's hit outs.
They scored 7 points. Yes, they got territory, but you don't get.
Yeah, but the problem was the setup. We didn't get anything.
Yeah.
Right. So we've got to set up. We've got the best ruckman in the league. We weren't set up properly for him. That tells me that the coaches aren't doing their job. And again, comes back to the 𝗍ecie situation. I think we lost a lot more than what we even consider with the loss of 𝗍ecie. 𝗍anie,
just on that, George. Before I think that's such an excellent point because that's, I guess, my point about we're not replacing, this focus on the midfield. We're not replacing them. They're not coming. I mean, just on we lost Track. He should, that whole question about he should come back on. He was hopeless when he came back on, couldn't impact the game. So we essentially didn't have our best midfielder for the entire game. But I think your point, George, that's a really important one is that when midfields aren't working, it's only partly to do with the players. It's hugely to do with the specialist line coach whose job it is to scout the opposition and create the plans all week, work out where the hit zones are, how they're going to do it. That's on the coaching staff, as you said. But you're the first person I've heard who's criticising the coaching staff. It's all been criticising the players.
The other one that I couldn't understand, Neal-Bullen did an absolutely superb job on 𝗍𝗂𝘃 throughout the ground. He didn't attend him when he was in the middle. Why? And when 𝗍𝗂𝘃 went into the middle, 𝗦cie played on him once, and Oliver played on him once, and 𝗍𝗂𝘃 waltzed out of the centre with the ball. We took our best tagger in this particular case away from the guy who was likely to do the most damage in the midfield, and Neal-Bullen's been playing in the midfield the last couple of weeks. I don't think he had a single centre bounce attendance this week, and yet he was assigned the role of 𝗍𝗂𝘃. Again, that comes back to the coaches. If you're going to follow a plan, follow the plan. Leave him in there and fight. Let the others fight it out. But at least he was stopping 𝗍𝗂𝘃 and doing a great job of it. To hold 𝗍𝗂𝘃 to 15 disposals for the match was just superb. But again, that's coaching problem. That's a coaching problem. So I think we really have to seriously look at what's going on there. We've got the best ruckman in the field. I still don't like Langdon not playing on the wing. You've only got to look at the metres gained for Langdon. You call the wingers a part of the midfield effectively these days in any case. Langdon only had 190 metres gained for the whole game. That's ridiculous. That is ridiculously that we've got our best, probably one of the best wingers in the AFL being played at some position up forward. God knows what. I think he was centre half forward at one stage. And the other thing that we're missing with Langdon in particular, because he's playing so far up the ground, is his ability to provide the outlet for the defenders. How many times over the years have we seen Langdon seemingly all on his own, which he is, because he runs so hard and gets to the spots when he's absolutely needed. And we've got a replacement like Billings goes in there who just doesn't do the work necessary.
Arguably, we won a premiership based on what he did, what you're just describing.
Yeah.
Running up and down that wing, providing an outlet. He was getting the ball in the back line, in the forward line. He was running up and down that ring. We've now got him just wasting away, getting 110 metres gained. It's criminal.
Yep. So that's enough. I think the problem lies with the coaches rather than the players.
The other thing too was Clarry. I mean, had an all right. I mean, the sort of average, but he's sort of really dropping off a cliff. He needs the bye more than probably all of us combined, I reckon. But it just drove. I could not believe the free kicks he gave away. They were there, weren't they? Those where he scragged him in the middle. Maybe one wasn't, but that's a frustration thing. And they were critical. It sort of took out any real chance, those two exits. So that were two of the exits they got clean. In fact, there were four, I think, that they, from their centre clearances, were for free kicks. So that's on Clarry. It's not really on the setup and the rucking, but that's the worst way to lose a centre clearance is a free kick given away to one of the mids in the middle, the opposition mids.
𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗁𝘀𝗁 says, thanks as always, guys, for a great podcast. I realise there's plenty of 2024 to play, so there's always hope of regaining form. But right now, it's hard to see how we get our mojo back this season. There's no shortage of issues, from a disjointed game plan to a lack of midfield depth and some old-fashioned connection problems. Right now, I feel this fix has to come post-season, where we can recruit for needs, reset and reload. That means adding much-needed depth and variety to our midfield to help out our core of Petrarca, Oliver and 𝗦cie. It also means getting serious about recruiting competitive and reliable forward options to support JVR, not relying on part-timers. Let's not waste time while we have generational talent like Gawn, May, Petrarca, Oliver and 𝗦cie playing in the same team. The clock's ticking. DZ says, I thought it was a game we should have won against a severely undermanned Collingwood. Our endeavour, our contest work was good and we seemed like we came to play, but our method let us down badly again, being unable to kick a decent score and letting too many out the back. There just doesn't seem to be a fix to this. And my question is, how did we lose our abilities seemingly overnight? And do you think we will ever get back to the team we were? Although we scored okay last year, This year we have had less inside 50s than St Kilda. Okay, that's the one. I must have read it earlier this evening. Red and Blue Rising says, where is the rampaging, never say die attack on the ball that we had in 21 and 22 when we were contested beasts? Why are we so mentally weak? How can these issues be fixed before our stars are finished? Jane02 says, this loss has destroyed my faith that we are going to be serious contenders for finals this season. Where has it all gone wrong? All sides have injuries, so we cannot blame this aspect. Can we come back after the bye with a different mindset and turn things around, or has the door been slammed firmly shut for us? Thank you, Andy, George and B-Man, for fronting up each week and presenting the podcast and giving us a chance to vent. I really don't know how you do it. You have my utmost respect. Thank you, Jane. Clayton Van Oliver says, first of all, thanks for all the work you do on the site and the podcast. If at this point we are on the hypothetical trajectory of worst case scenario and about to collapse once more into the footy doldrums, what is the team's best approach for the rest of the year to try to allay or avoid that? Should we hope for a low ladder position this year or to go to the draft again? Does this team, who has played high-end footy into finals for 3 seasons in a row, just need a longer break? Adversely, if we are on the hypothetical trajectory of Swan/Cats style long-term pointy end ladderness, how should the team approach the rest of the season? I don't think we should be wavering from the team and coaching structure based on one censored game. Having one cooked year in 4, actually pretty normal. See Hawthorn 2017, Tigers 2021, Cats 2023 and Swans 2023. Lastly, my thought on these fans' general negativity throughout these remarkable years are that we exhibit 3 generations of supporters not having any clue about what following a good footy club looks or feels like. My Hawthorn mate knows his team will come good. We expect us to become useless again. Can we change this? How? Well, how indeed. But, B-Man, I don't think we need to go into all of this on how we fix it. I think we've gone over it enough. But do you think that can we turn this around on the fly, or do we have to wait for 2025 and beyond?
Well, I mean, it depends a little bit on, from my perspective, if there's anything in what I'm saying about us gearing our season towards sort of, including the way we're training, towards, changing the program to be at our optimal fitness come finals, because we haven't done that in the last 2 years. In the last 2 years, we've not come into the finals in the shape that we needed to, or particularly in 22. I mean, 22, we were just so banged up, we were going nowhere, even if we'd happened to scrape through one of the wins that we, in one of the games we lost. So it's sort of funny because all of those questions are predicated on the season's over. And it's not from my perspective. It's not from Goody's perspective. I think go back to that comment about psychology. It depends what's in the mix. It depends if there's issues that we don't know about that are, if there's issues that are underneath or that, the fans don't know about that are having an impact. That, they're all, but on that front, there always is in any club of any group of 200 people at a footy club. There's always dramas. I mean, that's the reason why I've got no interest in that stuff. Because there always is dramas. But I think that final point is a really good one about that. That's a great one. Is that these sort of default setting is that let's all run around with our hair on fire because we're going to go back to the horror days of the 70s and 80s and, it's rebuilding. I mean, it's just like rebuilding from what? Come on. It's like
we have a word for it, MFCSS.
Yeah, that's right. So, but Goody has said right from the first time in his first press, what he's looking at is building a Swan-style, Cat-style model, right? So, like I said last week, is rebuilding how? We'll get rid of Petrarca, sell him, get rid of JVR maybe, and let's get 2 really good midfielders. How many good midfielders are floating around in that we could draft in who are an A grader? I mean, how many come through the draft itself? We won't get a top 10 pick this year. So, we're on this course and we'll stick to it. Let's see how the season washes up from here. But certainly I'm not saying this season's a write-off, and I'm sure Goody isn't.
Well, you can answer this question now because what says an easy yes/no question. Will we make finals? Based on the past 4 weeks, I can't see it, but want to see if there's consensus on the podcast panel. So this might almost be just 50 years of MFCSS, but it's no from me, and certainly not if the past month is any bit of an indication. George, followed by Big Man. Simple question: will we make the finals? Not can, and I know we can, but I don't think we will. But George.
Yes, we'll make finals. No, we won't make top 4.
Well, no one was saying top 4. I think that's almost out of the question. Big Man, we don't even need to ask you.
Yeah, we'll make top 4.
Oh, okay.
No, I don't know. I've lost my confidence. The top 4, I think, will make finals. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, when we lose to North in a couple of weeks, yes,
if we lose to North, I'm quitting the podcast.
Let's revisit all these.
Careful.
Well, we'll get into previews in a second. Just we've got finally some positivity from Demon Princess. Now we've got that voicemail, a voicemail from Demon Princess, who listeners to the podcast might remember. There was a gentleman who was a friend of Demon Princess who used to call in on her behalf. But now we've got the real Demon Princess calling in with some positivity to our day. Demon Princess, here you are.
Gentlemen, it's the Demon Princess here. Look, that was such a tough game. It is always incredibly depressing losing to Collingwood. I just wanted to pick up on something that Bin Man said in the podcast last week, and that is that we really need to support and love our team. GWS, they're not having a great run at the moment, and yesterday they put a message up on their socials asking their fans to stick with them. So I know they're a young club, they don't have our MFCSS history, and they do have a smaller supporter base, but the response to that post was really positive from their fans. So I'm just hoping that we can all get behind our boys and really give them that support and that lift. It's going to be a super tough run from here, and so I think they're really going to need us. So thanks so much. Love the podcast and go D's.
I guarantee you if Melbourne had posted stick with us, they would have had pictures of chopped up memberships, the works.
Stick with this.
She's right. GWS don't have 6 generations of MFCSS baked into them.
And if the GWS communications person thinks that putting something like that up on is going to get people to turn up, they are sadly mistaken.
Well, Will up there, I mean, they're great there. Like, their comms are, like, they're getting traction.
Social media is pretty good.
They're great. They're funny.
Do they have fans?
Yeah. And
who enjoys it? All the other clubs like looking at it.
But just before we lose the track, great call from Demon Princess. Could not agree more. And people talk like that previous question about the culture. So the end question from it's a good name, Clayton Van Oliver.
Van Oliver.
Well, how do you change that around? Why a Hawthorn, like my mate who barracks for Cats, he's not fussed. 4 out of 5, no worries. He won a flag 2 years ago. If we don't win one this year, we'll win one in the next few years. Is by starting is to sort of change that mindset of, oh, here we go, we're going to go back into, I get it. I mean, like I've said, I've followed the D's for as long as you guys and I've seen a lot more losses than I've seen wins. So I get where that sort of psychology comes from. But, it's not helpful for the club if, we're burning memberships. To be honest, that's what caught Richmond in a malaise for so long until they broke out of that and refused to get rid of Hardwick, refused the Nuffies who wanted to get rid of Hardwick in that period that George was talking about in 2016 and said, no, we're going to build a good team around him and we're going to stick to our guns. They got laughed at for their sort of claim, that their strategic plan of getting 100,000 members and winning flags. Well, no one's laughing at the Tigers now. And that's the sort of psychology, we should be taking as well. And just on, as you know, I'm a punter, and I, have a firm belief is that the punting market is the best market for indicators because you don't get people like me who've got my confirmation bias. You don't get people who, hate Melbourne or whatever. You get people who are putting their hard-earned money on it, and so the emotion is not in there. So to make the 8, we're $2 to make the 8 at the moment on Sportsbet. So that's basically a 50-50, So
how much for us to miss the 8? I'll take that one.
Well,
have
a guess what it might be, Andy.
I don't know, but
well, you're clearly not a punter. Generally, it's going to be around the same price. So in fact, it's $1.80. So
to miss it,
I was going to say it's $2. It's $1.80 to miss it.
Wow! All right, I'll take I'll take us making it.
So you could back it, and then you could give yourself some MFC insurance money.
No, I would never do that. I'd prefer the team to win. Let's get on to Casey. We'll do it very quickly because we're over 2 hours. In a thrilling round 11 match at Casey Fields, the Casey Demons secured their first home victory of the season with a decisive 52-point win over the Magpies. The victory was marked by a significant turnaround in form for Casey, revitalising their season. Demons led from the start and increased their lead at each interval, finishing with their highest score and largest winning margin of the year. Under cloudy but calm condition, the Demons honoured their roots by wearing the old Springvale Guernsey. Shay McCann was a standout performer, kicking 4 goals, 1 in each quarter, and taking 8 marks. Captain Mitch White displayed excellent leadership with 28 disposals and a goal. Colton Tolstrup was also impressive, contributing 26 disposals, 10 clearances, 5 marks, 5 tackles and a goal. Other notable performances including Ben Brown with 2 goals and contributions in the ruck. Adam Tomlinson was strong in defence with 22 disposals and 9 marks. Young midfielder Oliver Seston also made a significant impact with 23 possessions and 2 goals. On his debut since being picked up in the mid-season draft, West Australian Luca Kentfield kicked 2 goals, 1 from 4 disposals. Casey's ruckman Will Varell and Tom Fullerton were solid, and Tajwa Woden and Andy Moniz-Wakefield also had strong games with 20 and 17 disposals respectively. Casey's cohesive team play was evident with 12 different goal scorers showcasing their depth and versatility. The victory provides a much-needed boost as they head into the bye with their next game against North Melbourne and Casey on Sunday after our next seniors game. And that's it. George, anything to add? Otherwise, we'll move on.
Yeah, I think it's firstly important that this was 15th versus 19th.
And an injury-riddled Collingwood, so I can imagine the top players.
Yeah, they had only that I could recognise 2 or 3 players in total who'd played senior footy for Collingwood.
Only play who's in front of you, George.
Yeah, that's
We've
true.
lost games to teams that have no AFL players. So, as in Casey this year.
I'd be very careful about reading too much into this game. Like McAdam kicked 4 goals. Well, 2 of those. So we should. 2 of them were from absolute bullet passes from Seston and Tolstrup that he had no option other than to mark it. The third one was Joe the Goose out the back. So he kicks 4 goals, but only one of them was really worthwhile. There were some really disappointing efforts. Jefferson was absolutely ripped a new one by Collingwood's fullback Glover. Jefferson had 5 disposals for the whole game, 1 behind. Adams down the back had 3 disposals. That's not what we want to see. Ben Brown was actually a highlight.
I thought he was pretty. I watched half of it. He looked pretty mobile, didn't he?
Yeah, he looked very mobile, and he was being played in the ruck. So when we get to,
and he hit a beautiful target in the half that I saw. It spot up someone leading.
Yeah, and a great play, if I remember, about the 50-metre mark where he was going left and then switched it right and completely opened up the defence. Yeah, he was moving really, really well. 17 disposals, 2 goals, 1 and 6 headouts when he was in the ruck. Mm-hmm. There's another option perhaps for our rucking problem that we have. I've got no time for Fullerton, unfortunately. He's in the ruck.
How old's Fullerton? He's like mid-20s, isn't he? He looks like he's not had any AFL pre-seasons.
He's played 50 VFL games. I think that tells you where Fullerton is as a player. He's not a ruck that I can see. He certainly 25. Can't hold his own. He's a maybe forward. That's the best.
He's not big enough.
No, exactly. He's not strong. He's not strong enough, particularly. He's got the height, but he just hasn't got any strength. Varell did well off 12 disposals, 20 hitouts, which were more than Fullerton did out of his. But Tolstrup and Seston were the 2 real stand-ups. Tolstrup plays football like Jack Viney plays football. You never ever have to question about whether he's going to go for it or not. He just goes in.
Plays with intent, doesn't he?
He does, and he hits people hard, and he just see ball, get ball, and he does something with it when he does. And
Put him in the seniors.
And the good thing about both of them was they were both played in the midfield this week. They've been playing them in all sorts of straight.
Seston too, do you mean?
Both. Yep,
Right.
both Seston and Tolstrup were being played in the midfield because Laurie had gone to the seniors to play this week, so there was yet another hole in the midfield, and they were fantastic. Seston 2 goals, Tolstrup 1 goal, 23 disposals for Seston and 29 for Tolstrup. So
both good kicks, aren't they?
Both,
I like their kicking action, drill those short passes. And
Yep. So there was those two were standouts for me. Really impressed with what's his name, Kent Hyde.
He's the kid that we picked up in the draft.
Kentfield.
Yep. Sorry, my writing's awful. He only played about 10 minutes, I reckon, in the whole game. Obviously, he'd only arrived the week before. He came onto the field and he laid the most fabulous bump for his first motion in VFL football. Just absolutely cleaned out the player, and then he's come out and in that short period of time, I think he's kicked 1 goal, 2, or
2 goals, 1,
2 goals,
4
1
disposals.
Really? Yeah.
He's a big boy. He was playing senior footy with Subi, wasn't he?
That's right. Yeah, he's a big boy, and he's only 19. It was only a very limited number of minutes, but he looks a very, very likely type. And once
he's big as a red gun.
Yep, yeah. And when he gets some fitness, which is obviously he's lacking, he could very easily jump over where Jefferson is, for example, because Jefferson still has a long, long way to go to be able to come up to AFL level. Glover, the guy he was playing on, had 30 disposals, including 26 kicks. That for a fullback, that's just incredible. And they weren't just from kickouts. He absolutely destroyed them. So. Yeah, Ben Brown, a good likely game. Seston and Tolstrup miles ahead of anybody else. And
𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗏, by all accounts, pretty disappointing game, which is unfortunate.
Very disappointing.
From the ones and
he barely. He looked disinterested in the game almost. Came better, a little bit better in the second half, but first half was just forgettable.
All right, injury list, Marty Hoare and Jake Lever may return after the bye. We don't know. We'll know more about their availability once the injury report comes out in the coming days. However, we do know that star midfielder Norm Smith medalist and Bluey winner Christian Petrarca will be sidelined for a number of weeks with 4 cracked ribs and a lacerated spleen and a punctured lung. There's simply no replacing Track. So, boys, we're getting to changes. We have the week off, and it can't have come quick enough with Track a definite out and Lever maybe returning. No guarantees. I'll get your thoughts on changes in a moment. But Doug Remus says, drop the out-of-form senior players. Have a look at what we haven't seen yet. Time to have a look at AMW, Jefferson, Woden, not as a sub, Kynan Brown, Colt, and for God's sake, try second ruck Varel. Not all at once, but hold a few of these lame out-of-form senior players. Hold a few of these lame out-of-form senior players to account. And I got a quick voicemail from 𝗟𝗲𝗀. It's more about the changes for last week, but yeah.
Lastly, what is going on with our selection integrity? Guys are getting games who are playing absolutely crap. Petty, Turner had another stinker today. What are we doing? Reward the guys who are playing well. Why wouldn't Tomo stay in the team? Why wouldn't you move the magnets around? I'm really frustrated with we're letting guys get continual games who aren't contributing. And I'd rather see guys in the VFL get a crack than continue to play guys who are playing shit. Could lose to North in 2 weeks' time. Don't put it in the books as when we're going to win. So furious. The dynasty, or whatever it was going to be, is over.
𝗟𝗲𝗀's living up to the name we originally coined for him. With his first call, he started to be not so salty, but he's back to being salty, and it seems to follow the progression of how the team's travelling. B-Man followed by George. Your changes for our round 15 match against the Kangaroos.
I've no idea. It's just, however, I think it's an interesting
comment about
it's an interesting comment about playing. I mean, Petty hasn't had a good game, basically all season. You know,
when he looked his best? When he went down back for a few, he was in the ruck, I think, and he went down back. He took a great mark.
Disco Turner had a shocker, probably, I mean, he would have been a bit stiff. Tomo must wonder what the hell he's doing at the footy club. I personally, I said to George at the game, I've said this for a couple of years now, is our biggest hole is our forward line. I want to see Tomo try it up forward because that's his lack of pace that's the issue for him, and it would be less an issue for him as a forward, I think. He played a little while, not many games. He played a number of games at centre half forward, sort of half forward flank for the Giants, and I'd like to see him give it a go. The reason I raise that is because, you do wonder whether, is there some players like a Woden who gets dropped, and you see a player like Petty who plays equally poorly and he's in the side, and how does that go for the psychology and the cohesion of the team? But I'd also say that there's, who replaces Petty? We've already discounted Fullerton. Varel's not up to it. So, there's a lot of talk about our midfield. But as I said last week, it's no coincidence that we went out and got the big Kent fridge from Subiaco and not a midfielder, because our big issue is up forward. That's where we need some players. So I want to see the Colt come in. That's who I want to see come in, especially off that go. But I'm still not convinced. I really want to be wrong about Laurie, but I'm just not convinced by him. And
George,
I'd like to have a lot more changes than what they'll probably do. Unfortunately, Petrarca comes out, obviously. Lever comes in, obviously.
Well, do we know that he's back? Well, it was 2 to 3 weeks last time, but then in the bye.
Do we know how bad? How long? I've heard some people saying Petrarca will be out for the season. That's
entirely possible.
Jesus.
Well, think of how long Langdon took. I mean, we're going by Stephen May, but he's
it's also the ruptured spleen and the
punctured lung and the four ribs.
Yeah. I think, what's his name? The AFL doctor commentator, I think he said 6 weeks.
Peter Larkins.
But he didn't know how serious he was just going on.
But he was saying minimum 6. So go beyond that. But when you're having operations for spleens, it could be a lot longer. So Petrarca's out, definitely.
Bit of venting going on there.
Yeah, I was wondering when someone would bring that one up. I'd like to see Colt come in. He's playing well enough to actually go into the midfield. If they're going to put Laurie in, they might as well put Colt in, as a midfield player. So I'd also like to see Seston come in based on what he was doing this week. The other one who disappointed the people have completely looked over is Chandler. He's been
poor for the last month, hasn't he?
Yeah, poor for the last month. In this game, he had 62 metres gained.
And he just needed to hit that. He needed to kick that goal because that's that moment that Goody talks about. You can have a bad game, but if you're given a chance to take the moment, take it. And he
certainly did. So I think that creates an opportunity for someone like Seston who's capable of playing that role, and Seston can pinch hit if necessary, even as a mid. The other one I think we have to bring in someone alongside to help Max out in the ruck, whether it's Ben Brown or Varel. He needs someone in there. He can't be playing 90% game time if we're following the theory of having people available for finals, and you just can't get away with it. And Sherry at North Melbourne is a good ruck. You can't afford to try him against that. The other thing I'd still like to see is Lever comes in. I'd like to get rid of Billings and put Langdon back on the wing, put A and B back at half forward, put Sparrow as available as a mid instead of playing him on the wing that we were doing for a good part of this game.
He gets a bit lost, doesn't he? Sparrow,
he's not a winger. At the end of the day, he's not a winger.
Get ball, put him in the middle.
Yeah, so when we've got Langdon playing on the half forward line at the moment, we don't need that. Put Langdon on the wing. But certainly Colton, Seston are the main ones to come in. Lever, of course, and it'll be interesting to see what they actually do. I don't think they quite made enough changes last week.
One thing we know, because the Roos are, they've been sort of their thing this year has been going in hard, and so it's really no magic bullet is it is you go hard as you can. And so, you know, Melbourne have this year rightfully now got a reputation for a team that you can knock off its axis if you attack them and apply enough pressure, and there's enough evidence to say that's true. And so that's what they'll do. They'll come out as physically and hard as they can at us. That's their only chance of winning, probably the Roos. So they will, and so
they have to. They have to, because they're a young side. They're a highly skilled young side as well. That's how they have to play. They'll drop off towards the end of the game, but yeah, their midfield in particular is really first class.
Yeah, and if they do come out hard and knock us off our axis, and then our gremlins get in our head, you know, just you know, the long range forecast if that happens is for tears, Andy.
Yes. My MFCSS. Anything else you want to go in? Do you need to go into more depth into the preview?
No,
Phil C. simply asked.
Period, Andy.
Yeah, no, I need a break as well. I don't think we're going to be doing a mid-season review, guys. No. We've been reviewing the last couple of weeks. Nothing has changed. Phil C. asked, though, well, before we finish off, Phil C. simply asked, can we beat North? You should be jumping and saying, yes, we're going to beat them.
Well, you know, I don't want to be attacked for being too positive, but I'm fairly confident that we might have a win.
We're a long way. While North won this week, they were doing everything they could possibly think of to lose.
North beat West Coast too. West Coast beat us. Oh my God,
embarrassed us.
My head hurts.
So.
Yeah. But also they didn't have West Coast didn't have Hartley Reid this week, so I think it would have been a little bit different if he had actually played. But
we beat Richmond, and Richmond beat the Swans.
Yeah,
we're equally as good as the best team in the AFL at the moment on that score.
We'll be first on the ladder. All right, boys, let's leave it there for tonight. So we won't be back next week. We're going to take a well-earned break. We'll be back after the North Melbourne game. If you want to listen to the show live, then head on over to Demonland.com on a Monday night at 8:30 p.m. in 2 weeks' time. Thank you to our 5-star reviewer on Apple Podcasts. Thank you to Magnus. Thank you to our commentator on Facebook, Luke from Facebook. Thank you to our voicemailers, Salty, Rose Star, Wise D-Man, G from Brisbane, Demon Princess, and Matt from, didn't say where he's from. Your questions and comments form an integral part of the show, so thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions and comments. Thank you to Demon WA, Radish D, El Diablo 14, Lazy, Dr. Gonzo, Supreme Demon, Bates Mate, Travie 14, Back Naked, Wells 11, Pipefitter, Dutch Demon, At the Break of Dawn, Sweeper Northy, DZ, Red and Blue Rising, Jane02, Clayton Van, Oliver, What Say What, Doug Reamer, and Phil C. Thank you to my co-hosts, George and Bigman. Thank you to you, our loyal listeners. And don't forget, leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast from, and we'll read it out on the next show. Go Demons. I'll just put that in post for you, Bigman.
Oh, just go Redleggers.
You have been absolutely ground down by these past 4 out of 5 weeks.
I can't bring myself to saying it. So.
Go Demons.
Go Redleggers.
There you go.
Come on, Demons. Come on, Demons. Come on, Demons. Come on.